What did I even get married for? 2 years ago, I was happy and hopeful. I believed I'd spend my life with the person I loved, sharing vows and building a future together. But now, I've ended up working like a housekeeper in my in-laws' home. How did my life come to this? All I wanted was a peaceful married life. Now, I just want to leave this house. I've thought about running away so many times. But when the moment comes, I freeze. I just can't take that final step. Is this how my life is going to be forever? Just when I was about to give up, something gave me a spark of hope. My name is Nina. I'm 33 years old. 2 years ago, I married my husband, Kyle. We met at work and dated for 3 years before tying the knot. After we got married, I quit my job and became a housewife. Everything seemed fine at first, but not long after we started our new life, Kyle's father passed away suddenly. At that time, Kyle's dad, mom, and younger sister all lived together. His dad was the one who provided for the family. Kyle's mom was a full-time housewife, and his sister, Lily, was still in university. The money Kyle's dad left behind wasn't much and was mostly used to cover Lily's school fees. One day, Kyle's mom called him. "Kyle, can you come back home? We really need your help." Huh. At first, Kyle didn't want to agree. "But Mom, I have a life with Nina now. I can't just leave everything." "I know, I understand that. I promise I won't make things hard for you and Nina. Please, Kyle, we really have no one else to turn to." Kyle's mom was crying over the phone, begging him. I sat next to Kyle, listening to the whole conversation. It made me feel so conflicted. Kyle's mom had been a housewife her entire life. Now that her husband was gone, it wasn't easy for her to suddenly find work. Kyle even offered to send her some money, but she refused. "Money? Oh, there's no need for that. Just move back into our house. That way, you won't have to pay rent either, right?" "That's true, but Nina and I just got married." "It's fine. Nina and I get along well. I promise I won't make things hard for her." "Well, I'm not sure about this. Could you ask Nana directly? She'll probably understand your request." I think Kyle's mom already knew I wouldn't be able to say no. How could I? We had just gotten married, and I didn't have the courage to reject her request to live together. Kyle gave me a week to think about it. I spent every moment debating it, weighing my options. But no matter how much I thought about it, I just couldn't say no. Of course, I wanted to enjoy our new life, just the two of us. But I also knew that refusing would strain our relationship with Kyle's family in the future. I told myself, we need to keep the peace with his family. I can't risk them disliking me. So after a lot of thought, I agreed to move in. Kyle worried about me until the very end, but I reassured him, saying everything would be fine. We packed up and moved into his parents' house. On moving day, Kyle's mom and sister greeted me warmly. "Welcome, Nina. I'm so glad you're here. It'll be nice having you around." "Thank you. I'll do my best." Living with them had its upside, no rent. Kyle's salary would be enough to support everyone. His mom even promised to look for a job, and if money got tight, I could always return to work. That's what I thought. But I had no idea what her real intentions were. 2 weeks after we moved in, it all started to make sense. Kyle's work schedule was hectic, and he usually didn't get home until after 9 p.m. I woke up at 5:30 every morning to make breakfast and see him off. Afterward, I'd prepare breakfast for everyone else. One morning, I had just sat down to eat after seeing Kyle off when I heard a loud voice. "Nina." Startled, I turned toward the sound. Kyle's mom had walked into the room looking angry. "Oh, good morning," I said nervously. But before I could say more, she cut me off, raising her voice. "Wait a minute. What do you think you're doing?" I just saw Kyle off and sat down to have breakfast. "What? You're going to eat before me or Lily? How rude." "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to be disrespectful. I was planning to go to City Hall after this." "I don't care about that. How dare you eat before the heads of this household?" "I am sorry," I stammered, completely confused. Just then, Lily, my sister-in-law, came downstairs. Seeing her mom scolding me, she smirked. "Oh no, Nana got Mom mad." "But honestly, Nina, it's your fault. You're not very good at handling things, are you?" "What? What did I even do wrong?" I was stunned, unsure of what to say. "I've been living here for 2 weeks now, and I've realized something. You're the kind of people who just make everyone upset." "What?" I couldn't believe I was being told that. From that moment, everything got worse. Kyle's mom and sister started working together to mock and criticize me every chance they got. Nina, make sure you clean the house and do all the laundry. Kyle and I are going out. Make sure you do your job, Mrs. Housekeeper. Okay. Housekeeper? I'm not here just to do housework. What? Then what are you here for? How shameless. No wonder Kyle has such bad taste in women. Wait, at least do your own laundry. You're so clueless. We're letting you live here, so don't complain. Exactly. If you keep acting up, we'll tell Kyle to divorce you. It felt like I didn't see me as part of the family anymore. I tried to put up with it for the first few months, but eventually I couldn't handle it. One day, after Kyle came home from work, I decided to talk to him about how I was feeling. Hey Kyle, sorry to bother you while you're tired, but can we talk for a minute? Of course. What's wrong? It's about your mom and sister. They've been putting all the housework on me, and it's really been hard. Really? They've been making you do everything. I nodded, but I couldn't tell him everything that had been happening. I only shared the basics of the constant mistreatment I was facing. You know, even though I'm your wife, I still feel like an outsider here. I was hoping maybe you could talk to them, just to let them know it's becoming too much for me. I get it. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize things were this bad. It's okay. Also, do you think it would be okay if I took a part-time job during the day? Why? Did something change? I don't know. I just feel like I need to get out of the house for a little while. If that's what you want, go ahead. Thanks, Kyle. I hadn't told him the full truth, but the situation was worse than I had let on. The more I stayed in this house, the more my mother-in-law and sister-in-law made my life difficult. I started feeling like I wanted to avoid being home as much as possible. So I quickly found a job and started working at a bakery the following month. Even though I wasn't home as much, the bullying from my in-laws didn't stop. If anything, it seemed to get worse with my absence. Kyle's warnings only made his mom and sister more angry. By the second year of living with them, the situation had gotten worse every single day. Kyle's mom had claimed she was looking for a job, but she always made excuses saying she failed interviews when in fact she hadn't even gone to one. My sister-in-law had graduated from college, but she was only working part-time, barely making any money. Kyle had talked to them many times, but each time they apologized and promised to look for work, but nothing ever changed. I had had enough. One day, as I was doing my usual housework, I overheard Kyle's mom and sister arguing. It seemed they had plans to go out, but both claimed they didn't have any money. I thought it was ridiculous, but then Kyle's mom called out to me. Hey you, useless daughter-in-law, come here. We're going out, but we don't have any money. Can you lend us some? I'm sorry, but it's tight for me too, before payday. What? Are you refusing? You don't have the right to say no. Even if you say that, just give me the money already. Kyle's mom grabbed me and pulled my wallet from the pocket of my apron. I'd started carrying my wallet in my apron after she had taken it from my bag without asking before. Hey, please stop. I reached out to take my wallet back, but she slapped my hand away. Then, as she looked through my wallet, she scoffed. What is this? There's hardly anything in here. There's only $30 in this wallet. What? Seriously? You work, and this is all you have? That's really bad. You're useless. Watching you is so frustrating. And now you can't even contribute anything. Yeah, seriously. You're terrible at housework too. You're just worthless. Their laughter filled the room, and my self-esteem sank even lower. Then Kyle's mom said something unexpected. If she's just going to keep making us mad, why don't we just kick her out? That's a great idea. She's a nuisance. If we get rid of her, life will be easier. You're a genius, Mom. Plus, we'll save money on her living expenses and we can use it for ourselves. It was clear they saw me as nothing more than a servant and a way to get money. I'd had enough of their treatment. If you're going to keep acting like this, I won't hesitate to take action. I took a deep breath and stood my ground. Oh, really? Are you sure you want me to leave? Of course. Leave as soon as possible. Yeah, your presence is just annoying. But only if you have somewhere to go, of course. I see. Well, thank you very much. Goodbye then. I quickly went to my room and packed my things. Kyle's mom and sister looked a bit confused by how fast I was moving, but I ignored them and walked out of the house. I went to a hotel near Kyle's office. I contacted him and waited for him to finish work. Several hours later, Kyle finished work and met up with me. He looked confused, understandably. Nina, why are you here? I finally told Kyle everything. Babe, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, but your mom has been bullying me this whole time. What? My mom? Not just your mom. Lily, too. At first, they just pushed me to do all the housework, but lately the verbal abuse has gotten worse, and now they're even asking for money. That can't be true. Even though Kyle loved me, he was still close to his family, so I knew it would be hard for him to believe without proof. To show him I was serious, I pulled out the divorce papers I had prepared in advance and showed them to him. Kyle looked like he was about to cry and tore up the divorce papers. Nina? Why? I'm sorry, Nina. I didn't realize how much you were suffering. Why are you apologizing, Kyle? Nina, I know you're not the kind of person to lie like that. I understand you better than anyone else. When he said that, I couldn't hold it in and started crying. Kyle gently hugged me as I cried like a child. He believed me, his wife, instead of his mother and sister. That was enough to make me feel relieved. The next day, Kyle and I went back to my in-laws' house. When Kyle's mom saw me, she frowned but quickly pretended everything was fine in front of him. Nina, where did you go? I was worried about you, she said, clearly lying. Kyle went straight to his room and started packing his things. Then he said to his mom and sister, Nina and I are leaving this house. You can do whatever you want. What are you saying, Kyle? Yeah, Kyle, what happened all of a sudden? How can you act so calm about this? Nina was hurt because of you too. What are you talking about? We didn't do anything wrong, right, dear? Yeah. Kyle, you're not really believing what she says, are you? We didn't do anything. My sister-in-law even covered her face with both hands and pretended to cry, but Kyle didn't fall for it. He raised his voice and said to them, Stop this nonsense. Do you even understand how Nina felt all this time? Of course, I'm at fault for not noticing sooner, but the biggest responsibility lies with you too. I've ignored the fact that you didn't work all this time, but I've had enough. We're leaving. Wait, Kyle, what will happen to us if you leave? Yeah, wait, what about our lives? How should I know? Kyle replied, You two have been making us work while you just did whatever you wanted, and on top of that, you've been bullying my wife. How can you live with yourselves? Aren't you ashamed, especially with Dad gone? Let me tell you, I don't consider you two as my family anymore. From now on, Nina and I will live happily together. Don't interfere with us. Got it. Kyle smiled gently, took my hand, and we started to leave the living room. Then Kyle's mom shouted, Wait, Nana, I'm so sorry. Kyle's mom and sister looked at me with tears in their eyes. They must have been hoping I would forgive them so they could get Kyle's forgiveness as well. Nina, I'm so sorry, Kyle's mom repeated. Looking at her, I firmly responded, Enough with the apologies. There's nothing you can say now to make me forgive you. Please don't say that. We won't do anything to upset you anymore. I can't believe that. For the past 2 years, I've been living like I was in hell. Now that I'm finally free, you want me to go back to that life. I won't waste any more of my life on people like you. I turned my back and started walking. Kyle walked with me, matching his pace to mine. I felt like crying, but this time, I felt relief. After that, the two were forced to live a difficult life. Even though they owned the house and didn't have to pay rent, they still had to cover expenses like utilities, food, and property taxes. There was no way they could manage all that with just my sister-in-law's part-time job. So my mother-in-law ended up starting a part-time job as well. But since she didn't have much experience, she could only find low-paying jobs with small allowances. As a result, they couldn't enjoy the luxuries they were used to, and they became worn out. Kyle still gets requests for help from them, but he ignores all their messages without giving in. The eviction notice felt heavy in my hands as I watched Rebecca strut around our childhood home like she owned it. Well, technically she did now, according to the will she presented at the estate lawyer's office this morning. Don't worry, she said, examining her perfectly manicured nails. I'm giving you a full month to clear out, even though Dad's will only require 2 weeks. See, I can be generous. My name is Sophie Anderson, and at 34, I was watching my older sister dismantle my entire life with a few pieces of paper and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Our father, James Anderson, had passed away 3 weeks ago after a brief battle with cancer. The loss was devastating enough. But now this. I don't understand, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Dad always said he was leaving the house to both of us. He wanted us to share it. Rebecca rolled her eyes, settling into Dad's favorite leather armchair like she was trying it on for size. People change their minds, Sophie. Dad finally realized which daughter actually deserved his legacy. I looked around the study where we stood, Dad's sanctuary filled with his books, his collection of antique maps, and the lingering scent of his favorite pipe tobacco. This room held more memories than I could count. It was where he taught me to play chess, where he'd helped me with my homework, where he consoled me after my divorce 2 years ago. When did he make this change? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I just wanted to hear her say it. 3 months ago, Rebecca replied smugly. Right after his diagnosis, he called me over one evening and said he needed to make things right. Said he'd been foolish trying to split everything equally when clearly one of us was more capable. I nodded slowly, remembering that evening well. Dad had been heavily medicated, barely able to hold a conversation. Yet somehow he'd managed to not only change his will but make it heavily favor Rebecca, leaving her the house, his investment portfolio, and controlling interest in the family business. All I got was a small savings account and Dad's old car. What about the business? I asked, though I knew what was coming. Of that, Rebecca waved her hand dismissively. The board already approved my appointment as CEO. After all, I have been running things while you were off playing artist. I bit back a retort. My playing artist had actually been running a successful graphic design firm for the past 8 years. But Rebecca had always dismissed it as a hobby. In her world, if you weren't wearing a power suit and making other people miserable, you weren't really working. I'll need the keys to the house, she continued, holding out her hand. All copies, please, and don't even think about making extras. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my keyring, carefully removing the house key I'd had since I was 12. But as I did, my fingers brushed against another key, smaller, older, almost forgotten. The key to Dad's private safe. Rebecca didn't know about that safe. Nobody did, except me and Dad. He'd shown it to me on my 30th birthday, hidden behind one of his beloved antique maps. Keep this between us, he'd said with a wink. Sometimes a person needs a place for their real treasures. I handed Rebecca my house key, watching as she practically snatched it from my fingers. I'll have my things out by the end of the month, I said quietly. Make sure you do, she replied, standing up and straightening her designer blazer. I'm having the locks changed tomorrow anyway, but I'd hate to have to call the police if you overstay your welcome. As she clicked her way out of the study in her expensive heels, I waited until I heard the front door close. Then I counted to 100, making sure she was really gone. Only then did I move to the far wall, where Dad's prized 1847 map of London hung in its heavy wooden frame. My hands were steady as I lifted it carefully, revealing the small wall safe behind it. The old key fit perfectly, just as it had countless times before. But this time, when I opened the safe, I wasn't looking for the family photos or childhood mementos Dad kept there. I was looking for the envelope he placed inside 3 weeks ago, just days before he died. Sophie, he'd whispered from his hospital bed, pressing the envelope into my hands. Put this in the safe. Don't tell your sister. Promise me. I promised, though I hadn't looked inside the envelope at the time. I was too focused on his failing health, on trying to make his last days comfortable. But now, the envelope was exactly where I'd left it, tucked behind a stack of old photographs. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, pulling out several documents that would change everything. The first was a will, Dad's real will, dated just 2 weeks before his death and properly notarized. But it wasn't the will that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the second document, a detailed record of financial transactions spanning the past 5 years, all in Dad's meticulous handwriting. And at the top, a single sentence that made my blood run cold. Evidence of Rebecca's embezzlement from Anderson Global, estimated total, $2.7 million. There was more: bank statements, transfer records, copies of forged signatures. Dad had been building this file for years, documenting every penny Rebecca had stolen from the company. But the final document was what really made my hands shake. It was a letter written in Dad's distinctive scrawl. My dearest Sophie, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Rebecca has probably already tried to take everything. I'm so sorry I couldn't stop her myself, but the cancer moved too quickly. The real will is here, along with everything I've gathered about her theft from the company. I've known about it for years, but I could never bring myself to turn her in. She's still my daughter, despite everything. But I won't let her steal your inheritance too. The proof is all here. Use it wisely. I love you both, but you were always the stronger one, the one who could make the hard choices. Take care of our family's legacy. Love, Dad. I sat down in Dad's leather chair, the one Rebecca had so casually claimed earlier, and began to read through everything carefully. With each page, the full scope of her deception became clearer. She hadn't just forged the will. She'd been systematically draining company accounts for years, covering her tracks with fake investments and non-existent projects. Dad had caught on early but had chosen to document everything instead of confronting her. Maybe he'd hoped she'd stop on her own. Maybe he'd been trying to protect her in his own way. But in the end, he'd made sure the truth would come out. I pulled out my phone and called the one person I knew I could trust with this, Mark Reynolds, Dad's oldest friend and the family's longtime lawyer. We need to talk, I said when he answered. It's about Dad's will. The real one. Mark Reynolds' office hadn't changed in 20 years. The same dark wood paneling, the same leather chairs, even the same slightly crooked painting of a sailing ship that had fascinated me as a child. But today, as he reviewed the documents I brought him, the familiar surroundings offered little comfort. This is extraordinary, Mark said finally, looking up from the papers spread across his desk. James documented everything meticulously. The forged signatures, the fake accounts, even the offshore transfers. He didn't miss a detail. I nodded, thinking of all those evenings Dad had spent working late in his study. He hadn't been just managing the business, he'd been building a case against his own daughter. What about the will she presented this morning? I asked. The one leaving her everything? Mark's expression darkened. A forgery, without question. A good one, but still fake. The notary's stamp is perfect, but the signature, he pulled out a magnifying glass, examining the document closely. James's real signature had a distinctive loop in the J. This one's missing it. Plus, the date coincides with when he was heavily medicated. He could barely hold a pen, let alone sign legal documents. So what do we do? Mark leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. We have two options. We can go straight to the police with evidence of both the forged will and the embezzlement, or... He paused, studying my face. We can handle this more strategically. I thought about Rebecca's smug expression as she'd handed me the eviction notice. About all the years she'd dismissed my work, my choices, my entire life as somehow less valuable than hers. Tell me about strategic, I said. Mark outlined the plan carefully. First, we would quietly file Dad's real will with the probate court, but request a delay in processing. This would prevent Rebecca from making any irreversible decisions about the estate while giving us time to build our case. Next, we would conduct a full audit of Anderson Global's finances, documenting every instance of theft and fraud. Mark would bring in forensic accountants he trusted, ones who knew how to be discreet. The key, he explained, is to have everything in place before she realizes what's happening. Once we move, we need to move fast. I spent the next 2 weeks playing along with Rebecca's narrative. I began packing boxes, making a show of preparing to move out. Meanwhile, Mark's team worked tirelessly, unraveling the complex web of financial deception Rebecca had woven. The numbers were staggering. Beyond the $2.7 million Dad had documented, they found another $1 million hidden in various shell companies and fake consulting contracts. Rebecca hadn't just been stealing. She'd built an entire shadow operation within the company. 15 days after receiving the eviction notice, I got the call I'd been waiting for. We're ready, Mark said simply. The board meets tomorrow at 10 a.m. Be there. That night, as I sat in Dad's study supposedly packing his books, Rebecca stopped by to check on my progress. You're being very mature about this, she said, watching me wrap Dad's first edition Hemingways in bubble wrap. I was worried you'd make a scene. I carefully placed another book in a box. What would be the point? The will is clear, isn't it? She smiled, that same self-satisfied smile she worn since we were children whenever she got her way. I'm glad you understand. Once you're gone, you should really consider selling Dad's car. I could recommend some dealers. I'll keep that in mind, I replied, fighting to keep my voice neutral. By the way, aren't you running late for your dinner with the board members? Her eyes widened slightly. How did you know about that? I shrugged. Oh, I still talk to people at the company. They keep me updated. Something flickered across her face. Doubt, maybe even fear. But she masked it quickly. Well, yes, just a routine dinner, making sure everything transitioned smoothly. If she only knew how smooth the transition would be. The Anderson Global boardroom was intimidating by design. All gleaming mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Rebecca had always loved it, the way it made people feel small. Today, as I took my seat at the far end of the table, I watched her hold court at the head, completely unaware of what was coming. Now that everyone's here, she began, shuffling some papers importantly. I'd like to discuss our 5-year growth strategy. Actually, Mark interrupted, rising from his seat. There's been a change to the agenda. Rebecca's perfectly penciled eyebrows drew together in confusion. Excuse me? I set the agenda, and I don't recall. The first item, Mark continued as if she hadn't spoken, is the matter of James Anderson's will. The real one. The color drained from Rebecca's face as Mark began distributing copies of Dad's authentic will to each board member. I watched as her hands began to shake slightly, though she tried to hide it by gripping the edge of the table. This is ridiculous, she sputtered. We've already been through this. The will was read weeks ago. That will, I said quietly, speaking for the first time, was a forgery. Just like the signatures on all those transfer documents you've been using to steal from the company. The room went deadly silent. One by one, the board members began examining the documents in front of them. Not just the will, but the extensive evidence of Rebecca's embezzlement that Mark's team had compiled. These are very serious allegations, Thomas Chin, the head of the board, said gravely. Ms. Anderson, do you have any explanation for these discrepancies? Rebecca's composure cracked. This is absurd. Sophie's just jealous because Dad chose me to run the company. She's always been jealous of my success. Success? I couldn't help but laugh. Is that what you call stealing nearly $4 million from our family's company? I built this company, she shrieked, jumping to her feet. While you were playing with your little art projects, I was here every day, making the hard decisions. Like the decision to create fake consulting firms to funnel money into your personal accounts. Mark asked mildly, sliding another document across the table. Or the decision to forge Dad's signature on international wire transfers. Rebecca's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal's, looking for an ally, an escape route, anything. But she found only shocked and disgusted faces. Dad knew, I said softly. He knew everything, Rebecca. He documented it all. But instead of turning you in, he protected you. Right until the end, he was trying to protect you. Then why? Her voice cracked. Why reveal it now? Because you couldn't stop, could you? Even after he died, you had to take more. You forged his will, tried to steal my inheritance, and planned to continue bleeding the company dry. Thomas Chen cleared his throat. The police are waiting in the lobby. Mr. Reynolds has already provided them with copies of all documentation. Rebecca collapsed back into her chair, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. You can't do this, she whispered. I'm your sister. Yes, you are, I replied, standing up. And you'll always be my sister. But Dad trusted me to protect his legacy, the real one, not the empire you tried to build on lies and theft. As the police led Rebecca away in handcuffs, I remained in the boardroom, staring out at the city below. The same view she loved so much, the one she thought proved her superiority. The aftermath was exactly what you'd expect. Rebecca was charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. She took a plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial, but still ended up with 8 years in prison. The house, my house now, according to Dad's real will, felt different without the weight of secrets. I kept his study exactly as it was, right down to the antique map hiding the safe. Sometimes I sit in his leather chair, remembering how he taught me that strength isn't about dominating others, but about doing what's right, even when it's hard. Mark helped me restructure the company, implementing new financial controls and bringing in fresh talent. Anderson Global not only survived the scandal but thrived, partly because employees no longer had to work under Rebecca's toxic leadership. A year after everything happened, I received a letter from Rebecca's prison. Her handwriting, once so precise and controlled, was shaky. Dear Sophie, I've had a lot of time to think in here. About Dad, about what I did, about who I became. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not sure I even deserve it. But I want you to know that I understand now. Dad chose the right person to protect his legacy. I'm sorry for everything. Rebecca. I keep the letter in Dad's safe, along with all the other family documents that matter. Not because I've forgiven her, that will take time, if it ever comes, but because it's part of our story now. A reminder that sometimes the hardest choices are the right ones. The company continues to grow, but differently now. We've established a foundation in Dad's name that provides art education grants to underprivileged kids. My little art projects are finally being put to good use, designing materials for the foundation's programs. Late at night, when I'm working in Dad's study, I sometimes imagine I can smell his pipe tobacco, feel his presence in the room. I think he'd be proud, not just of how I handled Rebecca's betrayal, but of how I'm moving our family's legacy forward. The antique map still hangs on the wall, hiding its secrets, but now it reminds me of something else Dad used to say. The truth always finds its way to the surface. The only question is whether you'll be ready when it does. I was ready, and because of that, everything he worked for, everything he believed in, lives on. As for Rebecca, she'll be eligible for parole in 4 years. I don't know if she's really changed, if prison has taught her what Dad tried so hard to teach her about integrity and responsibility. But I do know this, when she gets out, she'll find that the door to Dad's study, my study now, is still open, because that's what family does. We leave the door open, even when we're not sure anyone deserves to walk through it. That's the real legacy Dad left us. Not the money, not the company, but the understanding that true strength lies in being able to do the right thing, even when it breaks your heart. And that's a lesson worth protecting. The notification flashed across my phone screen at 3:47 a.m. Domain foodwithgrace.com has been deleted. I've been expecting it, but my heart still skipped a beat. 5 years of work, over 2 million followers, and a thriving business, all seemingly erased with a few keystrokes. My name is Grace Mitchell, and my ex-husband had just tried to destroy my career. I was in my kitchen, testing recipes for my upcoming cookbook when the message came through. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was literally making his favorite dish, a spicy Korean fried chicken that had gone viral last year, when he decided to pull the trigger on his revenge plan. Another text lit up my screen. How does it feel to lose everything? Maybe you should have thought twice before exposing my affair and the divorce proceedings. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked up the phone. Mark had always been vindictive, but this was a new low. He'd waited until now, 3 months after our divorce was finalized, thinking he'd caught me off guard. What he didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment ever since I found lipstick on his collar 6 months ago. My blog, Food with Grace, had started as a hobby, just a way to share my love of cooking after leaving my corporate job. But it had grown into something beyond my wildest dreams. My recipes were featured in major magazines, I had a cookbook deal with a top publisher, and brands were constantly reaching out for collaborations. Mark had hated it at first, telling me I was wasting my time. Nobody makes real money from blogs, he'd said dismissively. Then the checks started coming in, bigger than his salary as a middle manager. Suddenly, he was very interested in our business. I made him an administrator on the site, a decision I'd regretted the moment I caught him with his assistant in our bed. The divorce had been ugly, with him threatening to make me pay for ruining his reputation. I'd known then that he'd try to hurt me through the blog. So I planned accordingly. Another text. Your followers are already noticing. Check Twitter. I did. #FoodWithGrace was trending, with concerned followers wondering why the site was down. My inbox was flooding with messages from worried fans and panicked brand partners. Time to put my plan into action. I opened my laptop and clicked on a folder labeled Recipes to Test. Inside was another folder, Backup Plan. With a few clicks, I initiated the restoration process I'd set up months ago. While that ran in the background, I called Sophie, my best friend and tech guru extraordinaire. It's happening, I said when she answered, despite the early hour. That bastard finally did it. She sounded fully awake, starting the countermeasures now. Sophie had helped me prepare for this, setting up multiple backups and a shadow site that could go live within hours. We documented everything. Every change Mark made to the site, every attempt to access the backend, every threatening email he'd sent. How long? I asked, watching the progress bar on my screen. 2 hours to restore everything. Another hour to redirect the domain. By breakfast time, Food with Grace will be back, bigger and better than ever. I smiled, thinking of the surprise waiting for Mark. And the other thing. Already in motion, the lawyers have everything they need. While my site was being restored, I pulled up the document I'd been compiling for months. Screenshots of Mark's threats, records of his attempts to sabotage my business, evidence of his affair. Everything that proved this was a calculated attack. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Diana, my publisher. Grace, what's happening? The site is temporarily down. I cut in smoothly. Technical difficulties. It'll be back up in a few hours. Are you sure? Because we have the cookbook promotion. Diana, I said firmly, trust me. Everything is under control. After reassuring her, I posted a quick message to my social media accounts. Dear followers, Food with Grace is experiencing some technical issues. Don't worry, we'll be back soon with some exciting changes. In the meantime, who's hungry for some Korean fried chicken? I attached a photo of the dish I'd just finished, perfectly crispy, glazed with a sauce that had taken me years to perfect. The responses were immediate. Can't wait for the site to be back. That chicken looks amazing. We trust you, Grace. Mark's next text came an hour later. Trying to do damage control? It's too late? Everything's gone. Recipes, photos, subscriber list, everything. I typed back, thanks for the heads up, making chicken. Want the recipe? His response was immediate. Are you insane? Your career is over. Is it? Better check the site in about an hour. I could almost feel his confusion through the phone. He thought he'd destroyed me, but he'd forgotten something crucial about who I was, who I'd always been. Before I was a food blogger, I was a project manager for a Fortune 500 company. I specialized in risk assessment and contingency planning. Mark used to make fun of my obsessive attention to detail, my need to have backup plans for my backup plans. Those same skills had saved my business. While the site restoration continued, I made a few more calls. First to my lawyer, confirming that everything was documented for the restraining order and civil suit we'd be filing. Then to my team, the photographers, recipe testers, and content managers who'd helped build Food with Grace into what it was. They'd all been briefed on this possibility. Everyone knew their roles. At 6:45 a.m., exactly 3 hours after Mark's attack, Sophie called. We're ready, she said. Want to do the honors? I sat at my kitchen counter, laptop open, the smell of Korean fried chicken still lingering in the air. Do it. With a few keystrokes, Food with Grace was back online, not just restored, but improved. The new site was faster, more secure, and featured an interface we'd been working on in secret for months. Every recipe was there, every photo, every subscriber. Plus some new content we'd been saving for this moment, including a video series on rising from the ashes, cooking Phoenix-inspired dishes from around the world. My phone started buzzing immediately. Followers celebrating the site's return. Brands impressed by the smooth handling of the technical difficulties. Food magazines wanting to cover the story. And Mark, his messages became increasingly frantic. What did you do? How is this possible? This isn't over. I waited until 7 a.m. exactly to respond. You're right, it's not over. Check your email. I knew what he'd find in his inbox. A letter from my lawyer detailing the criminal charges for cyber attacks and the civil suit for attempted business sabotage. Every threat he'd made, every action he'd taken, meticulously documented. The final blow was the press release, scheduled to go out in 1 hour. Food with Grace announces major expansion. We'd be launching a cooking school, a kitchenware line, and yes, that cookbook deal had just been doubled. My phone rang, Mark again. I let it go to voicemail, focusing instead on plating the Korean fried chicken for its photo shoot. The sauce glistened perfectly, garnished with sesame seeds and green onions. Sophie arrived just as I was finishing the styling. Want to hear something funny? She asked, setting up her camera. His attempt to delete the site actually triggered our security protocol. We now have evidence of exactly how he did it. Timestamps, IP addresses, everything. I adjusted a piece of chicken slightly. He never did understand that destroying something doesn't make you powerful. Building does. Speaking of building, Sophie grinned. Wait until he sees what else we've been working on. She was referring to our biggest project yet, one we kept completely under wraps. While Mark had been plotting to destroy food with grace, we've been developing an entire digital cooking platform. The attack on my site would now serve as the perfect launch publicity. As Sophie photographed the chicken, I checked the site metrics. Traffic was already higher than usual, with thousands of supportive comments pouring in. My followers weren't just staying, they were rallying around me. Another text from Mark. You think you're so clever. This isn't the end. I finally replied. You're right, it's a beginning. By the way, the chicken recipe you loved so much. I've improved it. But don't worry, you can find it on the site. It's under Sweet Revenge. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. While Mark seethed and sent increasingly desperate threats, Food with Grace was experiencing unprecedented growth. The attempted takedown had become a rallying point, with my story spreading through social media like wildfire. You have to see these numbers, Sophie said, bursting into my kitchen where I was filming a new recipe video. We've gained 500,000 followers in 3 days. I kept my focus on the camera as I demonstrated the perfect way to fold dumplings. How's the engagement? Off the charts. That Rising from the Ashes series, people are obsessed. The Phoenix metaphor is really resonating. Of course it was. Everyone loves a comeback story, especially one involving food and revenge served with style. My phone buzzed. Another email from Mark's lawyer, demanding we take down the press release about the site attack. I forwarded it to my legal team without reading it fully. They'd been expecting this. Grace? Sophie was looking at her tablet with concern. Mark's posted something. You should see this. I finished crimping the last dumpling before checking the screen she held out. There it was, a lengthy post on LinkedIn of all places, painting himself as the victim of a vindictive ex-wife who had manipulated the narrative of our divorce. According to sources close to the situation, he'd written, Food with Grace was jointly developed, with significant contributions from both parties during the marriage. I actually laughed out loud. Significant contributions? He once suggested I make spaghetti more authentic by adding ketchup. Sophie wasn't smiling. He's claiming partial ownership of the brand. Let him. I turned back to my dumplings, placing them carefully in the steamer. We have years of documentation proving he had nothing to do with content creation. Plus, I pulled up a folder on my laptop labeled Insurance. Inside were hundreds of screenshots, every dismissive comment he'd made about the blog on social media, every email where he'd mocked my little cooking hobby, every text where he complained about me wasting time on recipe development. I saved everything, I explained. From day one. Call it a chef's instinct for keeping good records. Sophie scrolled through the folder, her eyes widening. There's even a video. From 3 years ago, Christmas dinner. He had quite a lot to say about how anyone could run a food blog, and how I was lucky he let me play around with this nonsense instead of getting a real job. I smiled. Mind if he was going through a documentary phase? Filmed the whole thing. You're scary sometimes, you know that? No, I corrected, checking the temperature on my steamer. I'm prepared. That preparation was about to pay off in ways even I hadn't anticipated. While Mark was trying to claim ownership of Food with Grace, our new digital platform was in final testing. We'd named it Feast, a comprehensive cooking education platform that would make my blog look like a small side project in comparison. The next morning, I had a meeting with my publisher about the cookbook. Diana was practically bouncing with excitement. The pre-orders are incredible, she announced. We need to double the initial print run. What about the bonus chapter? I asked. She grinned. You mean the one about rebuilding after betrayal, complete with Phoenix-themed recipes, already laid out and ready to go? The timing couldn't be better. She was right. The publicity from Mark's attack had created the perfect launch platform for everything we'd been developing. My phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer. Judge granted the restraining order. Mark can't contact you or access any Food with Grace properties. Another piece falling into place. But Mark had one last card to play. That evening, as I was testing recipes for Feast's launch menu, I got a call from an unknown number. "Is this Grace Mitchell?" A woman's voice asked. "Yes. This is Rachel from the Times. I'm working on a story about your ex-husband's claims regarding food with Grace. He's provided some interesting documentation." My hand tightened around the phone. What kind of documentation? Emails discussing blog strategy, some early recipe notes with his comments. He's claiming he was the real creative force behind the brand's success. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. Of course he'd go to the press. Of course he tried to manipulate the narrative. "Ms. Rachel," I said calmly, "I'd be happy to discuss this with you. In fact, I think I have some materials you'd find very interesting. Would you like to come to my studio tomorrow? I'll be testing recipes for my new platform. We can talk while I cook." There was a pause. New platform? Oh yes, I smiled. And I make excellent dumplings. The next day, Rachel sat at my kitchen counter, recorder running, as I demonstrated the dumpling technique I perfected over years of practice. "So," she said, watching me fold perfect pleats into the wrapper, "tell me about these claims your ex-husband is making." I gestured to the laptop set up nearby. "Before we get to that, I'd like to show you something." For the next hour, I walked her through everything: the documented history of food with Grace, the evidence of Mark's dismissal of the blog, the video from that Christmas dinner. I showed her the threatening texts he'd sent before and after the divorce, the records of his attempted site takedown, the paper trail of my sole ownership and development of the brand. "And now," I said, setting a plate of perfectly steamed dumplings in front of her, "let me tell you about Feast." By the time Rachel left, she had a very different story than the one Mark had tried to sell. 2 days later, her article ran in the Times. From blog to empire. How one chef turned betrayal into business success. The piece detailed not just Mark's attempted sabotage, but the full scope of what we built and what we were about to launch. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Feast's waitlist grew to over 100,000 people overnight. The cookbook pre-orders doubled again, and Food with Grace, we passed 3 million followers. Mark's final text came the next day. "You planned this. All of it." I was in my test kitchen, filming a series on traditional dumpling techniques from around the world for Feast's launch. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very skills he dismissed as a hobby had built an empire. "No, Mark," I typed back. "You plan to destroy something. I plan to build something better." Then I blocked his number and turned back to my dumplings. 6 months later, I stood on a stage at the International Food Media Awards, accepting the award for digital innovation in culinary education. Feast had revolutionized online cooking education, while Food with Grace had become the gold standard for culinary content creation. "Success," I said in my acceptance speech, "is like a well-developed recipe. It takes time, patience, and a willingness to learn from your mistakes. Sometimes the ingredients life hands you seem bitter at first, but with the right technique, you can transform them into something extraordinary." The audience applauded, but I wasn't finished. And to anyone who's ever been told their dreams are just a hobby, their passion is just a waste of time, their goals are unrealistic, remember this: the same fire that others use to try to destroy you can become the flame that helps you rise, stronger and more determined than ever. Later that night, at the celebration dinner, Sophie raised her glass. "To the phoenix of the food world," she toasted, "and to perfect dumplings." I laughed, clinking my glass against hers. "To being prepared." "You know," she said thoughtfully, "Mark really did you a favor. Without his attack, we might have rolled everything out more slowly." "True," I nodded. "Sometimes your enemies become your best motivators." As we enjoyed the meal, including a special batch of phoenix-shaped dumplings I created for the occasion, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. Mark had tried to erase my work, thinking he could destroy years of effort with a few keystrokes. Instead, he'd helped launch the next phase of my career, proving once again that sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying what others build. It's about building something they never imagined possible, and I was just getting started. The next morning, as I reviewed the final edits for my cookbook, a notification popped up on my phone. A news alert about Mark. His company had demoted him following the publicity from his failed attack on Food with Grace. Apparently, they didn't appreciate his approach to conflict resolution. I closed the alert without reading further. His story wasn't my concern anymore. I had recipes to develop, classes to teach, and an empire to run. After all, success is the best revenge, especially when served with perfect dumplings.
My name is Pamela Ruth, and never in my wildest dreams did I imagine sharing this story. I grew up in privilege, the only child of Ruth and Madison. My father, a self-made businessman, had built his empire from the ground up. He was a stern yet loving figure who pushed me to strive for greatness. In contrast, my mother embodied grace and elegance, seamlessly navigating the social elite with poise. Our home, a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city, was a haven of luxury. I had access to the finest education, designer wardrobes, and vacations to the most exotic locations. Yet, despite this seemingly perfect life, there was an emptiness within me that I couldn't ignore. That changed in my final year of college when I met Terry Roy. He struck me like lightning, charismatic, handsome, and with a unique ability to truly see me. We began dating, and for the first time, I felt alive, like my world had finally found its color. My parents, however, did not share my enthusiasm. One evening over dinner, my mother gently insinuated that Terry might be more interested in our wealth than in me. My father was more direct, dismissing him as a man without ambition or prospects who could never sustain the lifestyle I had grown accustomed to. I defended him fiercely, insisting that love mattered more than material comfort. Things came to a head when Terry proposed to me in the park where we had shared our first date. It was a simple, heartfelt moment, and I said yes without hesitation. When I shared the news with my parents, my father gave me an ultimatum: if I married Terry, I would be disowned. Tears filled my eyes as I begged for their support and understanding, but my father's resolve was ironclad, and my mother stood silently by his side. That night, heartbroken but resolute, I packed my belongings and left the home I had always known. I moved into Terry's modest apartment, a far cry from the luxury I had grown up with, and together we began planning our wedding. I held on to the hope that my parents would eventually come around, but as the big day approached, their absence became painfully clear. On my wedding day, as I walked down the aisle and met Terry's gaze brimming with love, all my doubts melted away. In that moment, nothing else mattered but us. After the wedding, a stroke of fortune from my late grandfather changed our circumstances. His inheritance allowed us to move into a beautiful downtown apartment with high ceilings and sweeping city views. It felt like a dream, and I poured my heart into making it our sanctuary. Terry worked tirelessly at his marketing agency, often coming home late but never failing to greet me with a smile and a kiss. Meanwhile, I found joy in decorating our space and volunteering at a local animal shelter. About a year and a half into our marriage, life shifted again. I discovered I was pregnant. The sight of the positive test filled me with a mix of joy and uncertainty. When I shared the news with Terry, his excitement was boundless. He lifted me in a jubilant twirl, exclaiming, "We're going to be parents. Pamela, this is amazing." The arrival of our son, Zachary, was a moment of pure, overwhelming love. From his tiny fingers to the tufts of dark hair that mirrored Terry's, he was perfect. In that instant, my life felt fuller than I had ever imagined. I sent a photo of Zachary to my parents, hoping it might bridge the growing chasm between us. I waited anxiously for a reply, but their silence was deafening. Not a word, not a single acknowledgement. Terry noticed my disappointment and tried to reassure me. "They'll come around," he said with a warm smile. How could they resist this little guy? I clung to his optimism and refocused on our small, loving family. As the months passed and Zachary grew, I felt a longing to reclaim a part of my identity. After some searching, I found a part-time position as a manager at a local boutique. It seemed ideal, a chance to balance work and home life. My days became a whirlwind of feeding Zachary, managing work, running the household, and collapsing into bed at night, only to repeat it all the next day. As Zachary's first birthday approached, I began noticing a change in Terry. He grew distant, often coming home late and constantly glued to his phone. Concerned, I finally asked him one evening, "Is everything okay at work?" "Yeah, just busy with a big project," he replied, his tone dismissive and his eyes avoiding mine. The unsettled feeling in my gut grew stronger. On the surface, our life seemed perfect: a beautiful son, a lovely home, and decent jobs, but something felt off, an invisible crack spreading through the foundation of our relationship. One evening, as I was tucking Zachary into bed, Terry's voice carried an unusual seriousness. "Pamela, we need to talk," he said, his expression tense. Cornering me in the nursery, he suggested, no, insisted, that I quit my job. "The house is a mess, and Zachary needs more attention," he claimed. I was stunned. Quitting my job wasn't an option I had ever considered. I loved my work and felt we were managing just fine. But Terry was relentless. "I'm the man of this house," he declared, his voice rising. "I'm telling you, it's time to quit." We argued long into the night, but his unyielding stance wore me down. With a heavy heart, I resigned the next day, convincing myself it was for the best. I poured myself into my new full-time role at home, cleaning, cooking, and spending every waking moment with Zachary. I tried to find fulfillment in the rhythm of daily life, but something within me felt hollow. Weeks turned into months, and the gap between Terry and me widened. His behavior grew increasingly erratic. He started coming home later each night, sometimes reeking of alcohol. Unusual withdrawals from our bank account began to catch my attention. One evening, while folding laundry, I decided to confront him. "Terry, where is all our money going? We're barely making ends meet," I asked, keeping my tone calm. His reaction was explosive. "Maybe if you knew how to budget properly, we wouldn't have this problem," he snapped. His words cut deeper than I expected. This wasn't the man I had fallen in love with. Things continued to deteriorate. Terry's criticisms became relentless. The house was never clean enough, the meals weren't good enough, and I wasn't giving Zachary enough attention. The tension reached its peak when Zachary fell ill with a severe flu. Feverish and inconsolable, he required constant care. After 2 sleepless nights, I pleaded with Terry, "Please, can you take a day off work? I'm exhausted." His response was cold. "Take a day off? Are you kidding me? Some of us actually have to work for a living, Pamela." The next day, he came home with a suitcase. "I'm going to a hotel for a few days," he said flatly, leaving me standing there, stunned and holding our sick child. "I need to rest after work, not listen to a screaming kid," Terry declared, his voice cold and final. I stood frozen in disbelief as he walked out the door, leaving me to handle everything alone. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house, and I collapsed to the floor, cradling Zachary in my arms, overwhelmed by exhaustion and heartbreak. I tried to soothe both his cries and my own. The man who had once adored me seemed to have vanished. At that moment, I desperately missed my parents. I longed to call them, to hear my mother's calming voice and feel my father's protective embrace. But pride and shame held me back. How could I admit they might have been right about Terry all along? As I rocked Zachary to sleep, my father's warning echoed in my mind. "He's not the man you think he is, Pamela." The days following Terry's departure were a blur of sleepless nights and endless responsibilities. Thankfully, Zachary's fever eventually subsided. As he recovered, I found myself with more time to think, perhaps too much time. The cracks in my marriage were becoming impossible to ignore. When Terry returned a week later, he was like a stranger, distant, irritable, and resentful toward both Zachary and me. One evening, he came home earlier than usual, his expression serious, a stack of papers in his hand. "Pamela, we need to talk about insurance," he announced, sitting down at the kitchen table. He explained that he had taken out a $3 million life insurance policy on himself and suggested I do the same. "It's for Zachary's future, in case anything happens to either of us," he reasoned, his tone insistent. "Don't you want to make sure he's taken care of?" While his words sounded logical, something about the situation unsettled me. $3 million, Terry? That seems excessive, especially since I don't work outside the home anymore, I said cautiously. His eyes hardened. "It's for Zachary's future," he repeated, his tone brooking no argument. Despite my unease, I nodded slowly, agreeing to consider it. Over the following days, Terry's behavior grew increasingly peculiar. He was glued to his phone, texting at odd hours and stepping out to take calls, often locking himself in our home office. My unease turned into a gnawing suspicion I couldn't ignore. One morning, after Terry left for work, I reached a breaking point. The uncertainty was unbearable. Trembling, I searched online for help and found the number for CC Top Private Investigations. A gruff voice answered, "CC Top Private Investigations, how can I help you?" Taking a deep breath, I stammered, "I need someone to follow my husband. I think he might be cheating." The investigator's voice softened. "I see, ma'am. Why don't you come into our office so we can discuss the details?" That afternoon, with Zachary napping peacefully, I met with an investigator named Emma. She was straightforward and attentive, her demeanor putting me at ease as I poured out my concerns: Terry's late-night phone calls, his secretive behavior, and the drastic changes in his attitude. Emma took detailed notes, her expression serious yet understanding. "Don't worry, Mrs. Roy, she reassured me, we'll get to the bottom of this. I'll have my best person on it. As I left her office, a mix of fear and relief washed over me. I wasn't sure what I would find, but I knew I couldn't live in the shadows of doubt any longer. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me, relief and dread, both fighting for dominance. Part of me desperately clung to the hope that this was all a misunderstanding, but deep down, I feared that the truth would change my life forever. 2 weeks later, Emma called with the results of the investigation. Her voice was somber, and I braced myself. Mrs. Roy, we have the report ready. You might want to sit down for this. My heart hammered in my chest as I sank into a chair, preparing myself for whatever came next. I'm ready, tell me everything. Emma's words hit me like a storm. The evidence was irrefutable. Terry had been unfaithful. He had a mistress. The report laid it all out: photographs, text messages, hotel receipts. It was overwhelming, undeniable proof. My world shattered. The next morning, after Terry left for work, I sprang into action. My hands trembled as I packed a bag for Zachary and me, just the essentials: clothes, diapers, a few of Zachary's favorite toys, and some family photos that once held precious memories now felt like painful reminders of everything I was losing. We're going to see Grandma and Grandpa, I told Zachary as I strapped him into the stroller. He giggled, blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding around us. To avoid rush hour traffic, I decided to take the metro to my parents' house. As we approached the station, my mind raced with plans for our future, but then disaster struck. Crossing the street, I heard the screech of tires. In an instant, I shoved Zachary's stroller to safety, only to feel the impact of the car hitting me. Pain overwhelmed me, and then darkness took over. When I regained consciousness, I found myself in a hospital room, the steady beeping of machines around me. Terry sat beside the bed, looking worn and anxious. Zachary? I croaked, my throat dry with fear. He's fine, Pamela, Terry reassured me, squeezing my hand. He's with Bella, your best friend, not a scratch on him. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly overshadowed by the searing pain in my body. Glancing down, I saw that both my legs were encased in casts. You have multiple fractures in both legs, Terry explained softly. The doctors say it'll take about a year to fully recover. You'll need to use a wheelchair for a while. I closed my eyes, trying to process the gravity of this news. The road ahead would be long and challenging, and I wasn't sure how I was going to handle it. But then, amid the haze of hospital lights and sterile smells, a sudden clarity struck me. I know about her, I blurted out, my eyes wide open as I studied Terry's reaction. Your mistress, I know everything. Terry's face drained of color for a split second. He seemed ready to deny it, but then his shoulders slumped. It wasn't serious, he mumbled, his voice small. It was a stupid mistake. His next words came in a rush. When I got the call about your accident, I realized how close I came to losing you. I can't lose you, Pamela. Please, can we start over? Give me another chance. I'll do better, I promise. Looking at him, the man I had once loved so deeply, I saw genuine remorse in his eyes, and though my heart felt heavy, I was exhausted from the turmoil of the past few weeks.
Okay, I found myself saying, we can try. The day I was discharged from the hospital felt surreal. Terry showed up with a bouquet of pink peonies, my favorite flowers. His smile held a mix of concern and affection as he helped me into a wheelchair. Hope flickered within me. Maybe, just maybe, we could salvage what was left of our relationship. The first few weeks back home were surprisingly pleasant. Terry was attentive and caring, helping me with daily activities and treating me with a tenderness that reminded me of the happier times we had shared. One evening, as we relaxed on the couch, Terry looked at me with a hopeful gleam in his eyes. I've been thinking, he began, holding my hand gently. We should get away for a weekend, just the two of us, to celebrate your recovery. And, well, us, really. My heart fluttered with a mix of anticipation and nervousness as I asked, what do you think? Terry smiled, his eyes gleaming with excitement. I found a cozy little house in the mountains, he said, his voice filled with promise. It overlooks a beautiful canyon. What do you say? His suggestion sounded like an idyllic escape. That sounds wonderful, I replied, but what about Zachary? And I'm in a wheelchair. I'm sure Bella wouldn't mind watching him for a couple of days, he answered with a shrug. And as for the wheelchair, I'll carry you if I have to. Come on, it'll be good for us. Swayed by his enthusiasm and the chance to reconnect, I agreed. The drive to the mountain retreat was peaceful. the winding roads offering breathtaking views that seemed to ease the tension built up over the past few months. The cabin, nestled in seclusion, was everything he promised, charming and with a stunning view of the canyon. After settling in, Terry suggested I rest while he explored the area. "You relax, I'll check out the surroundings," he said before heading out. Alone, I decided to catch up on emails, something I hadn't done since the accident. Searching for my phone, I rolled over to Terry's laptop. As I opened the browser, an unfamiliar email caught my eye. The subject line sent a chill through me: "Urgent, new information about your case." With trembling hands, I opened the message. It was from Emma, the private investigator I'd hired weeks ago. My heart raced as I read her urgent words. "Mrs. Roy, I've been trying to reach you. Your number is out of service. I've uncovered disturbing new information. You're in danger. Your husband was involved in your accident. He's trying to get rid of you for the insurance money." The world seemed to freeze as the weight of her words sank in. The serene escape Terry had planned suddenly felt ominous, and every moment with him now took on a sinister hue. The email contained disturbing evidence, photos, text messages, and a video of a woman, eerily similar to Terry's assistant, driving the car just before the accident. Overcome with shock, I quickly closed the laptop as Terry walked in. I tried to mask my panic, though my heart pounded wildly. "Everything okay?" he asked casually, though his eyes were sharp. "Yeah, I just can't find my phone," I lied, my voice shaking slightly. "Have you seen it?" He shrugged nonchalantly. "Oh, it must have broken in the accident," he said, his cold smile sending a shiver down my spine. Can I borrow your phone?" I forced myself to ask, keeping my voice steady. "I want to check on Zachary and see how he's doing with Bella." He hesitated, but then handed me his phone. "Sure, go ahead, I'll just be right here." With trembling hands, I dialed my father's number. I couldn't directly call the police, but I remembered a coded signal we'd established years ago. As my father answered, I kept my tone bright. "Hey, Bella, how's everything going? How's Buddy the bear doing?" There was a slight pause before my father's voice came through, disguised by a higher pitch. "Oh, same old, same old. How about you?" Relief washed over me. He understood. "It's lovely up here," I said, aware of Terry's watchful gaze. "I'm at this beautiful cabin, 147, Pine Ridge Road. The view of Evergreen Canyon is just stunning." "I see," my father replied cautiously. "When do you think you'll be back?" "Oh, I dream of seeing you right now," I said emphatically. "I miss you guys already." After a few more pleasantries, I ended the call. Terry seemed satisfied, suspecting nothing. As evening fell, he suggested we take a walk. "The sunset over the canyon is beautiful. We shouldn't miss it," he said, his tone light, but fear gripped my heart. "That sounds nice," I managed to reply, my voice barely audible. He wheeled me down a narrow path that hugged the canyon's edge. The view was indeed breathtaking, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, but all I could think about was the sheer drop just feet away. Terry pushed me forward, talking about the scenery as if everything was fine. I closed my eyes and silently prayed, hoping my father would find us in time. Suddenly, we reached the edge of the cliff. Terry turned my wheelchair to face him, and the loving mask he'd worn until now dropped. His cold, detached expression sent a chill through me. "Pamela," he said, his voice icy, "I'm really sorry it had to come to this. The car accident was supposed to take care of everything, but you just had to survive, didn't you?" My blood ran cold as the full realization hit me. "Terry, please," I whispered, tears streaming down my face, "don't do this." He laughed mirthlessly. "Do you have any idea how perfect this is? A tragic accident at a scenic overlook. Your wheelchair rolls off the edge when the brakes fail. I'll be the grieving widower, inherit your apartment, and cash in on that $3 million insurance policy. It's foolproof." As he spoke, he inched my wheelchair closer to the cliff's edge. I closed my eyes, silently praying for a miracle. Suddenly, the sound of shouts and rapid footsteps filled the air. My eyes snapped open just in time to see my father sprinting down the path, several police officers hot on his heels. "Pamela," my father cried, his voice urgent. Just as Terry was about to push me over the edge, my father grabbed the handles of my wheelchair and yanked me back from the precipice. The police tackled Terry to the ground, reading him his rights as they cuffed him. I watched in stunned silence, the reality of what had nearly happened sinking in. My father knelt beside me, pulling me into a tight embrace. Overwhelmed, I broke down in his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm so sorry, Dad," I gasped, between sobs. "You were right about him. I should have listened to you." He stroked my hair gently, his voice thick with emotion. "No, sweetheart, I'm the one who should be sorry. We let our pride keep us apart. Can you forgive us for not being there for you and Zachary?" I nodded silently, my tears speaking volumes. In that long, poignant moment, years of hurt and misunderstanding melted away. In the weeks that followed, my life changed drastically. I filed for divorce, and with the overwhelming evidence against him, Terry was sentenced to prison for attempted murder. His mistress, who had driven the car during the accident, was also convicted. The apartment, now a place of painful memories, was sold. I bought a new home, one close to an excellent school for Zachary and just a few blocks from my parents' house. During my rehabilitation, I moved back in with them, and it was a year of profound healing, physically and emotionally. My parents doted on Zachary, making up for lost time. Slowly, amid the love and care of my family, I began to trust again, smile again, and hope again. I rebuilt my life from the ashes of my past, finding strength in the renewed bonds with my family and the promise of new beginnings.
Finally, I can get rid of this trash. My mother-in-law, Emily, spat those venomous words with a cold, disdainful glare that made me feel utterly insignificant. I stood frozen, her cruel words ringing in my ears. For 7 long years, I had endured her contempt, always telling myself that things might change. But this morning shattered that fragile hope. When I told my husband, Mark, I wanted a divorce, Emily pounced with the full force of her bitterness, unleashing a barrage of insults that laid bare her true feelings. It was painfully clear I was never part of this family in her eyes. Desperately, I turned to Mark, clinging to the faint hope that he might defend me, that he might see the hurt in my eyes and stand by me. But instead, his icy words cut deeper than Emily's. "Mom's right," he said with a shrug. "You're useless, just leave already." His gaze mirrored hers, cold, unfeeling, final. In that moment, something in me shifted, a calmness swept over me, extinguishing the fire of humiliation and despair. It was as if I was finally seeing the truth that had been hidden in plain sight. 7 years of misery, 7 years of trying to prove my worth to people who would never see it. "I understand now," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "If even my husband doesn't see value in me, then there's no reason for me to stay. My presence here only causes harm, to me and to everyone else." It was the first time I truly felt the strength of my decision. Yesterday, I had reached out for help, sensing the end was near. Now, as if on cue, the doorbell rang. I ignored the hateful shouts behind me, Emily's and Mark's voices, blending into a single cruel cacophony. Calmly, I walked to the door, my hand steady as I unlatched the chain. As I opened the door, the shouting stopped abruptly, swallowed by a heavy silence. "My name is Sarah, I'm 33 years old, a stay-at-home mom. Life has never been easy, and my marriage was no exception. Growing up, I learned early that love could be fragile. My parents divorced when I was in elementary school, a moment that shaped my childhood. "I'm sorry, Sarah," my father had said one evening when I was just 8 years old. "From now on, your mom and I will live apart." I stared at him, confused and heartbroken. "But Mom and Dad, you get along so well," I protested. "Why would you say something like that?" My mom gently stroked my hair, trying to soothe me. "Sweetheart, it's already been decided," she said softly, "but we both love you very much. You'll stay with me, and Dad will visit whenever he can." Tears spilled down my cheeks as I clung to my father. "I don't want to be away from Dad. Will I ever see you again?" He hugged me tightly, his voice trembling. "Of course, you will. I'll always visit, I promise." Though I didn't fully understand why they couldn't be together, their reassurance comforted me. True to their word, my parents arranged regular visits. Despite living apart, I still felt like I had a family. We moved into my grandparents' house, where they helped raise me while my mom worked long hours. My grandparents loved me deeply, and they tried to fill the gaps left by my parents' separation. "Your mom isn't a bad person," they would tell me. "She loves you very much." "That's right," my grandma would add, "and we'll always be here for you, sweetheart." Their love was unwavering, but it couldn't completely fill the void. I didn't have the heart to tell them how lonely I truly felt. It would have broken theirs. Years later, my father explained their divorce. "Your mom and I loved each other, Sarah," he said, "but certain circumstances made it impossible to stay together." Knowing their separation wasn't born out of hatred gave me hope. Though I carried the wounds of that time, I believed that love could still exist, even when things fell apart. After graduating college, I got a job at a large department store, following in my mother's footsteps. I thought working in the same industry might help me understand her better. Even though our relationship often felt distant, I threw myself into my career, hoping to find clarity. 3 years later, the store's owner introduced me to his son, Mark. "Sarah, you're such a hard worker," he said. "I'd love for you to meet my son. Who knows, maybe you'll be perfect for each other." I was hesitant about marriage, but his insistence led to a formal meeting. Mark was set to inherit the family business, and his father saw me as an ideal match. During our first conversations, I shared my fears about marriage and my struggles with trust, shaped by my parents' divorce. Mark listened patiently. "Your mom sounds like an amazing woman," he said. "She must love you deeply, even if it didn't always show." His understanding drew me in. "I felt lonely as a child too," he confessed. "My parents were always busy. That's why I know we can build a loving family together." His sincerity reassured me, and I let myself believe him. Before long, we were engaged. After our wedding, we moved into a beautiful home arranged by Mark's parents. I thought we were starting the perfect chapter of our lives. A year later, I found out I was pregnant. Mark and his parents were thrilled. I was overjoyed too, eager to start the family I'd always dreamed of. Looking back, that was the happiest moment in our marriage, the calm before the storm. Everything changed when we learned I was expecting a girl. I'll never forget the look on my father-in-law, David's face. When I told my father-in-law that I was expecting a girl, his face darkened, and his demeanor shifted. It was as if he saw me as a failure. "A girl? Why couldn't you have a boy to carry on the family name?" he said, his words as cold as his expression. Until that moment, my in-laws had treated me kindly, but now, their warmth vanished, replaced by disdain. "Oh, Mark, you really picked a disappointing wife, didn't you?" Emily, who had always been friendly, now mirrored her husband's contempt. I turned to Mark, hoping he would defend me. He didn't. No matter how many times I begged him to stand up to his parents' cruel comments, he ignored me. Soon, he stopped listening to me entirely. His silence gave his parents free rein to escalate their insults and mistreatment. When I mentioned my plan to return to my parents' home for the birth, they became even more aggressive. "You're part of this family now, Sarah," Emily snapped. "You don't have a home to return to, and being pregnant doesn't mean you can't do housework." At the time, my in-laws lived nearby, but they started spending more and more time at our house, treating it as if it were their own. Despite my nausea and constant fatigue, Emily insisted I continue with all the chores. "Pregnancy isn't an illness, dear," she'd say. "Housework is the duty of a wife." One day, overwhelmed and unwell, I folded the laundry imperfectly, and Emily seized the chance to criticize. "You're folding it all wrong, it'll wrinkle by the time we wear it," she snapped. Exhausted, I responded without thinking, "I'll fix it later." Emily's face turned red with anger. "How dare you talk back to me, you insolent girl." From that point, her treatment of me grew even worse. Still, I held on. I endured her harshness and eventually gave birth to my daughter, but even then, I wasn't allowed to contact my own mother. My in-laws insisted they would take care of everything. Later, I discovered they had told my mother not to worry, assuring her they would handle everything on my behalf. Instead, I spent those early days of motherhood lonely and isolated, longing for my family's support. When I returned home from the hospital, I was met with another shock. My in-laws had moved into our house without my consent. Worse, they had taken over the nursery I had lovingly prepared for my baby, relegating my newborn and me to a small, cluttered storage room. Despite my fragile condition after giving birth, they treated me like a servant, demanding I cook and clean while they lounged. To outsiders, they painted a different picture. "Our poor daughter-in-law is still recovering," they would say. "We moved in to help her." In reality, they did nothing to help. Mark, who had taken paternity leave, spent his time out with his parents, ignoring me and our baby. He showed no interest in his daughter and acted as if neither of us mattered. On weekends, he often stayed out all night, and I began to suspect his indifference wasn't just about our family, there might be someone else. The thought of divorce crossed my mind, but I pushed it away. I didn't want my daughter to experience the same loneliness I had felt growing up. I believed if I endured the hardship, I could protect her. But I was wrong. My in-laws' obsession with appearances meant they treated me and my daughter well in front of others, creating the illusion of a perfect family. Neighbors admired them, praising how kind they were and how much my husband seemed to care for us. It was all a facade. Then, one day, Mark began pressuring me to have a second child. "We need a son to carry on the family name," he insisted. "People are starting to ask about it. We better get on it." His parents joined in, berating me. "You can't even give us a son or manage the house properly." Emily sneered. "Why did we even let you marry Mark? You're such a disappointment." Despite everything, I tried my best to care for my daughter and shield her from the toxicity around us. By the time she turned 7, my in-laws and husband had all but ignored her. She was terrified of them, shrinking in fear whenever they raised their voices. I showered her with love, hoping it would be enough. But then something happened that finally broke me. One morning, while I was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, I heard my daughter crying upstairs. Her cries were unusual. She rarely went to the second floor, where my in-laws stayed. Alarmed, I rushed upstairs. At the top of the stairs, I saw Emily towering over my daughter, her hand raised, ready to strike. "Emily!" I screamed, running to my daughter and pulling her into my arms. My little girl clung to me, sobbing uncontrollably. I turned to Emily, my heart pounding with fury and fear. "What were you trying to do to my daughter?" I demanded. Emily clicked her tongue dismissively. "Nothing." Without another word, she turned and walked away as if nothing had happened. Just then, Mark stepped out of the bedroom, his face twisted with irritation. "Mark," I cried, "your mother just tried to hit our daughter." He sighed, clicking his tongue, just like his mother. "What did Katie do to upset her?" "It's probably your fault for not raising her right. Stop bothering me with this nonsense." Without waiting for a response, he walked away, leaving me standing there with my sobbing child in my arms. We retreated to the small storage room we'd been forced to live in since her birth. I sat on the bed, stroking Katie's hair to calm her as my heart raced with anger and despair. "Sweetheart, what happened? Can you tell Mommy?" Through her tears, Katie explained. Emily had called her upstairs, away from me, and threatened her. When Katie hesitated, Emily used a treasured possession, a handkerchief I had embroidered with her initials, as bait. "Grandma took this from me," Katie said, handing me the small, torn piece of fabric. "She said if I didn't come upstairs, I wouldn't get it back." My heart shattered. That handkerchief wasn't just a piece of cloth, it was something my daughter cherished, a symbol of my love for her, and Emily had used it to manipulate her. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay any longer. This wasn't just about me anymore. I had to protect my daughter, no matter the cost. I hugged my daughter tightly, overwhelmed with relief that I had reached her in time. The thought of what could have happened if I hadn't made it chilled me to the core. That moment was a turning point. I couldn't let this nightmare continue. I couldn't keep subjecting my daughter to such a toxic environment. That same day, I called my mother and told her everything. She was horrified but immediately offered to take Katie in. I dropped Katie off at school, packed a few of her belongings, and drove to my mother's house. I knew she would be safe there. That evening, I decided it was time to confront my husband and in-laws. As I approached the living room, I heard their voices and froze. What I overheard made my blood run cold. "You should have been more careful, Mom. This morning was too close. I didn't think Sarah would come running so fast," Mark said. "I thought I had more time," Emily replied dismissively. Their tone was casual, as if discussing a minor inconvenience, not the horrifying reality of what they had tried to do. "Well, if you're going to pull something like that, at least be discreet. We don't want anyone finding out," Mark added with a sneer. "Maybe next time, we'll make her pull weeds in the heat. That'll teach her," Emily said with a cold laugh. My heart raced as the realization washed over me. They were conspiring to harm my daughter, and they didn't even care. All the years I had endured their cruelty, telling myself it was for Katie's sake, suddenly felt like a lie. My daughter deserved better than this. She deserved love, safety, and peace, none of which existed in this house. I made up my mind right then. It was time to leave. I called my father and told him everything. He was furious, but he promised to help. As I packed my belongings, I remembered a conversation I'd had with Katie that morning. "Katie, would you be okay if Mommy and Daddy lived in different places?" I had asked gently. "Yes, Mommy, I want that. I want to live with you," she replied without hesitation. Her honesty hit me like a bolt of lightning. I had been so blind to her pain, focusing only on enduring mine. She had suffered just as much, if not more, and had been hiding it just like I had. That evening, the doorbell rang just as my husband and in-laws were shouting at me to leave. I ignored their insults and calmly walked to the door. When I opened it, my father stood there, his presence a calm but firm anchor. "Sarah, I'm here to take you home. Let's go," he said. The moment my husband saw my father, his smug expression turned to panic. "What are you doing here?" Mark stammered. "It's been a long time, Mark. I'm here for my daughter," my father said, his voice steady but simmering with restrained anger. "Mr. Johnson, wait, there must be some misunderstanding," Mark's father interjected, his tone desperate. "There's no misunderstanding," my father replied, cutting him off. "I've heard everything. This ends now." Mark and his parents froze, finally grasping the gravity of the situation. What they had always dismissed was that my father was a respected and influential figure in the business world, and, more importantly, he had been their store's largest supplier. "It's unfortunate," my father continued, "but given the circumstances, I'll have to reconsider doing business with you moving forward." The color drained from their faces. Mark's father stammered, "Please, Mr. Johnson, this is all a misunderstanding. Sarah is just upset." My father raised a hand, silencing him. "Enough. I've seen how you've treated my daughter and granddaughter. I will not allow it to continue." He turned to me, his expression softening. "Sarah, let's go." Without another word, my father took my bags and walked me out the door. As we reached his car, I could hear Mark and his parents scrambling, their voices pleading for forgiveness, but I didn't look back. When we arrived at my parents' house, my mother was waiting with open arms. She hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I should have been there for you sooner," she said. "No, Mom, I'm sorry. I should have come to you for help a long time ago," I replied, the tears flowing freely now. For the first time in years, I felt safe. My parents reassured me that everything would be okay. Over the next few weeks, my father helped me finalize the divorce, ensuring Mark would pay child support and alimony. Katie and I stayed with my parents during this time, and slowly, life began to feel normal again. Katie started a new school and quickly adjusted, making new friends and laughing in a way I hadn't seen in years. Meanwhile, I found a new purpose working for my mother's jewelry design business. To my surprise, I had a knack for design, and with her guidance, I began building a career. Months later, Mark tried to cause trouble one last time. He showed up at Katie's school, claiming to be her father and demanding to take her home. The school called me immediately, and I rushed over. When I arrived, I barely recognized him, disheveled and desperate. He looked like a shadow of the man I once knew. "Sarah, we need to talk," he pleaded. "I've lost everything, my parents, the store, the house. We can fix this, for Katie's sake." I saw through him instantly. He didn't care about us, he cared about regaining his comfortable life. "We're not getting back together, Mark. It's over," I said firmly. "You're making a mistake. You need me," he snapped, his desperation turning to anger. "I don't need you, Mark. I never did. Katie and I are doing just fine without you," I replied, and with that, I walked away. That was the last time I saw him. In the years that followed, Katie and I built a new life. She thrived in her new school, and I found success in my mother's business. One day, Katie told my father she wanted to travel the world with him. "You'll need to learn fluent Japanese first," he teased. "I'm already working on it, Grandpa," she replied with a grin. For the first time in years, our lives were filled with peace, love, and laughter. We were finally free, and that was enough for me. Since both my parents worked full-time, I attended daycare from a young age and grew up watching them work tirelessly every day. Inspired by their dedication, I dreamed of becoming a successful career woman, an independent person who could stand on her own without relying on anyone else. Fueled by this ambition and my naturally strong personality, I became highly competitive as a child. If I fell during a race in PE class, I would get back up without crying, determined to finish strong. If I didn't score at the top of my class on a test, I'd stay up late studying until I achieved better results. Failure was never an option for me. "You don't always have to be number one, Sarah," my parents would say. "We just want you to shine as yourself. We're proud of your hard work, but remember, it's important to lean on your family too. We're here to support you." I carried that advice with me as I entered a prestigious high school known for its rigorous academic standards. Passing the entrance exam with top scores was a milestone, and it was there that I first met Mark, someone who would eventually change my life. Mark had the highest grades in the entrance exam and delivered the freshman speech at the opening ceremony. "I've always worked hard and never feared failure," he said during his speech. "It's okay not to be number one. I believe failure is a valuable experience." Those words resonated deeply with me, reminding me of my father's similar encouragements. I felt an instant connection to Mark. As fate would have it, we were placed in the same advanced class, a group of the top students in the school. Despite the competitive environment, Mark consistently outperformed everyone. As we grew closer, Mark shared stories of his upbringing. "I've never placed second in academics or sports," he said, his tone a mix of pride and humility. "My mom was strict, but I'm grateful. It made me capable of handling almost anything." Meeting his mother at the entrance ceremony, I understood where his drive came from. She exuded strength and sophistication, and her influence was evident in Mark's achievements. Over our 3 years of high school together, Mark excelled at everything. He was a class leader, the anchor for our relay team, the choir competition conductor, and always topped the exams. Though I admired him deeply, and had a quiet crush, I never acted on my feelings. He seemed out of reach, a level of perfection I could only aspire to. After high school, I focused on my own goals, determined to carve out a path of success. I faced multiple job rejections, but I never gave up. Eventually, I landed a position at a top company, a prestigious opportunity, even though it was my 5th choice. This marked my first step toward my childhood dream of becoming a career woman. As one of the few women hired for a general position at the time, I worked tirelessly. My days were a blur of travel, running in heels I wasn't yet used to, and striving for both financial and emotional independence. While I occasionally exchanged emails with my parents, I avoided burdening them with my struggles. I knew they were aging, and I wanted to reassure them that I could handle things on my own. Yet, as I approached 30, I couldn't help but feel unsettled watching my friends settle down and start families. When an invitation to my high school reunion arrived, I decided to step away from my work-focused life for a night and attend. Seeing my old classmates was both surreal and heartwarming. Amid the laughter and reminiscing, I heard a familiar voice. "Sarah, is that you? Wow, you look amazing." "Mark." I turned to see him, looking just as sharp as I remembered. "It's been so long, you haven't aged a bit." We fell into easy conversation, catching up on the years we had missed. Mark was now a top salesman at a multinational company, a dream role I had once aspired to myself. "I just won first place in the company's young sales division," he shared with a modest smile. "They even held an award ceremony for me." Mark still carried the aura of an elite achiever, but he was more laid back than I remembered. His suit fit him perfectly, and I couldn't help but admire the man he had become. As we talked, I told him about my own career and how hard I had been working. That night, our connection rekindled, and soon after, we began dating. Although our busy schedules limited how much time we could spend together, I was happier than I had been in years. Slowly, I began to consider that life might be more than just work. Perhaps it was time to build something lasting, a home, a family, a future beyond my career. On our 1-year anniversary, Mark proposed, and I said yes. After more than a decade, we were finally coming together. At 30, marriage felt like a significant milestone, filling me with both joy and uncertainty. My demanding job required me to travel frequently, and I faced a difficult choice: should I request a transfer, stay in my current role, or even consider a career change? Mark, ever supportive, reminded me how much I loved my work. I trusted that Mark would support whatever decision I made, though I carried mixed feelings as I went to meet his mother, Amy. Since Mark's father had passed away a few years earlier, it was just her now. Amy had always seemed strict, but when I saw her again, she looked even thinner and more severe than I remembered. "So, you're Sarah," she said, her eyes assessing me. "I hear you were Mark's classmate in high school. Graduating from that school means you must be quite smart." "I'm not sure about smart," I replied nervously, "but I work hard. I'm at a large company in a position not typically held by women. I'm currently leading a major project." As I continued explaining myself, Amy suddenly smiled. That's enough. I can see you're very capable." I felt a wave of relief, thinking I'd earned her approval, but then she added, "You know, I don't need a career woman. A woman's job is to take care of the home, send her husband off with a smile, have a warm meal ready when he returns, and raise the children properly. That's what I did, and it's what I expect from you." Her words left me stunned. Mark had never mentioned any of this. "She's right," Mark said casually. "I'll make the money, you don't need to work." Although being a successful, independent woman had been my childhood dream, I couldn't deny that I was physically and mentally exhausted from the demands of my job. Amy pressed on. "A woman's happiness is in supporting her husband. If you keep working, people might think Mark can't support his family." I looked to Mark for support, but he just nodded in agreement with his mother. It shocked me. I thought times had changed. That people no longer saw working wives as a reflection on their husbands. But I'm not very good at housework, I protested weakly. I've focused on my career, so I might need some help. That's concerning, Amy said, frowning, but I can teach you. After all, we'll be living together. Living together? I asked, startled. Mark had never mentioned this. Yes, Amy said matter-of-factly. This house is too big for me alone. There's plenty of space for you, Mark, and any future grandkids. Why waste money on a separate home? I felt overwhelmed and trapped by her expectations. Just as I was trying to process it all, Mark spoke again. I'm not the kind of guy who needs his wife to work, he said. I make more than enough to support us. Besides, you're so talented that if you ever want to go back to work, I'm sure you'll find something quickly. His confidence in my abilities felt like a small consolation. I decided to give their way a try and resigned from my job. My colleagues were surprised and tried to convince me to stay, but they also told me I was welcome back anytime if I changed my mind. Their encouragement gave me a sense of security as I left the workforce. The next few months were spent learning from Amy. She was strict, but after years of working in a tough, male-dominated environment, her sternness didn't faze me. Not long after, I found out I was pregnant. When our daughter Lily was born, Mark was overjoyed, and to my surprise, Amy doted on Lily. Lily is just the cutest, isn't she? Amy would coo, her affection heartwarming but fleeting. Her demands on me increased. I'll take care of Lily, you focus on the housework, she'd say. We're running low on supplies, can you do the shopping? Dragging my postpartum body around to keep up with the housework was exhausting, but having Amy care for Lily was helpful. Mark was rarely home, busy with work, so I appreciated the support, even if it came with constant demands. Amy's generosity extended only to Lily and Mark. She made sure Lily had the best of everything but never offered me so much as a kind word. Mark's career soared as he climbed the ranks at his company, seemingly invincible, until he wasn't. One evening, when Lily was in upper elementary school, Mark came home looking pale and defeated. Mark, what's wrong? I asked, concerned. He slumped into a chair and buried his face in his hands. It's over, he said. I made a huge mistake at work. The client was furious. My boss berated me, and even my juniors pitied me. I couldn't take it, so I quit. I stared at him in disbelief. You quit? Over one mistake? Lily's about to start private middle school. We need that income. Even Amy, usually unflappable, looked distressed. Can't you go back and apologize? Fix things? She asked. No, Mark said firmly. I can't show my face there again. Everyone thinks I'm a failure. Mark had never faced failure before, and now he was completely unraveling. He locked himself in his room, leaving me to pick up the pieces. Sarah, Amy said sharply, you need to go out and work. But you always said a woman's job is to stay home, I protested. Amy's face hardened. The inheritance is gone. Mark's probably spent most of your savings too. We have no choice. Stunned, I realized how little I'd known about our financial situation. There was no time to dwell on it. I reached out to my old company, relying on my career experience and determination, and was fortunate to be rehired. I threw myself into work, becoming the family's breadwinner. Though the transition was overwhelming, we stabilized financially. Lily attended private school, and I supported Amy and Mark. Mark remained distant, his bitterness showing in his silence and occasional barbs. I wanted to urge him to rebuild his life, but held back, focusing instead on keeping our family afloat. Amy, for her part, returned to her old ways, showing little gratitude and worrying only about Mark's well-being. Meanwhile, Mark began withdrawing more, taking money from our accounts and wandering aimlessly. Looking back, I couldn't help but wonder how things had spiraled so far. I realized I should have left or confronted Mark long ago, but I couldn't bring myself to abandon the man who had once supported me. While I worked tirelessly, Mark wasted his days in idleness. Lily, now old enough to understand, watched her father with a mix of sadness and disdain, and it was clear Mark sensed her disappointment. The tension at home was suffocating. When Lily was in middle school, Mark finally left us. He left a note. You'll be fine without me. I found someone who needs me. I was stunned. Amy, in her grief, lashed out at me. This is your fault. You drove him away. I never want to see you or Lily again. She even tried to evict us. Wait, how will you manage without me? I asked, bewildered. Don't underestimate me. I don't need you, she snapped. And so, Lily and I packed our things and left the house. By then, Lily was mature enough to help with household chores while I focused on my career. We were busy, But we found happiness in our small but peaceful life. I didn't file for divorce immediately since I had no idea where Mark was. After 7 years of no contact, he was legally declared dead, which simplified the process. 10 years passed. Lily graduated from university and started her career, becoming a strong, successful woman. I was proud of her, and of myself, for navigating the hardships we faced. I was dating Tom, a kind and dependable man, and we lived together in a cozy home. Life felt complete. Then, one day, I received a call from an unknown number. Thinking it might be work-related, I answered. "Sarah, it's me. I had a hard time finding your number," the voice said. It was Mark. "What do you want?" I asked, my heart pounding. "I'm in trouble. Please help me. We're still family, right? It's your duty to help your husband." The nerve of him. "You abandoned us for 10 years. How dare you call now? We're not family anymore. Don't contact me again." I hung up, furious and shaken. I didn't tell Tom about the call and tried to move on. But a few days later, I returned home early to find shadows near my front door. Fearing it was an intruder, I approached cautiously. It was Mark and Amy. "Finally, you're home. We've been waiting," Mark said, looking desperate. "What are you doing here?" I demanded. "Please, Sarah, we've had our differences, but we're still family. I need your help." Mark explained that after leaving me, he had moved in with a younger woman named Emily, who needed him. However, their life quickly spiraled out of control. Mark worked low-paying jobs to maintain a facade of success, borrowing heavily to impress Emily. Amy, who had tracked Mark down, moved in with him, only to find herself living in poverty. "I'm drowning in debt. We're still married. Sarah, let's start over. You're doing well, right?" Mark pleaded. Before I could respond, Lily arrived home. "What's going on here?" she asked. Mark turned to her, his face softening. "Lily, you've grown so much. You look just like me. We're family." Lily's voice was firm. "No, we're not. Mom and I have been fine without you." Mark tried to argue, claiming we were still married, but Lily stopped him. "Mom filed for divorce years ago. You were legally declared dead after 7 years of no contact." Mark and Amy were stunned. "But that's impossible. You can't do that without my permission," Mark stammered. "Of course, she could. My stepdad, Tom, is a lawyer, and he handled everything," Lily said. Mark's face turned pale, desperate. He tried to defend himself. "I didn't mean for things to get this bad. Emily needed me." I smiled grimly. "Emily? Did you ever learn her last name?" Mark shook his head. "No, she said she didn't like sharing personal details. Her last name is Stone. She's married to your former boss, Mr. Stone." Mark's face drained of color as I explained. Emily had used him for years, while her husband remained unaware of her lavish spending, until recently. Mr. Stone had hired a private investigator, uncovering everything. Just then, Tom arrived home. "What's going on here, Mark? If you're here to cause trouble, leave now. This is private property." Defeated, Mark and Amy left. Not long after, Mark faced legal consequences for his actions. Mr. Stone divorced Emily, and their lives were shattered. As for me, I had finally achieved the life I always dreamed of. Lily had grown into a strong, independent woman, and I knew she would never settle for less than she deserved. Tom and I chose not to marry, finding happiness in our partnership without legal formalities. I had overcome every obstacle and emerged stronger, and I hoped Lily would always remember to chase her dreams and never let anyone hold her back. I urgently called Edward, explaining that our parents were gravely ill and that he needed to return home immediately. Despite my heartfelt pleas, he dismissed my concerns coldly, insisting he was too tied up with a work trip and accusing me of overreacting. He abruptly ended the call, ignoring my attempts to keep him on the line. For weeks later, when Edward finally returned home, indifferent and distant, I had the painful task of telling him that he had missed both of our parents' funerals. Shocked and bewildered, he couldn't comprehend what I was saying, thinking it was some kind of cruel joke. I reminded him of the call I made, warning him about their critical health condition, and his face fell as regret washed over him, leaving him speechless. My name is Janet Rachel, a 51-year-old woman who has devoted her life to family, stepping away from a promising career in administration after marriage. My journey with Edward began in college, where we connected through our shared love for paddle. Initially, our relationship was strained. Edward, the leader of the paddle club and focused on national competitions, was harsh and demanding. He only cared about skill, not the experience, and I often found myself relegated to the sidelines, picking up balls after failing to meet his high expectations. But my frustration turned into determination. I practiced relentlessly in private, and during a practice session, to everyone's surprise, including Edward's, I successfully returned one of his challenging serves. That moment earned his respect and admiration, and for the first time, our relationship shifted from animosity to a budding connection. From that point on, my feelings for Edward deepened, despite his continued strict demeanor. I found myself falling for him, and our bond grew stronger. During one of our monthly gatherings, after a social night, Edward unexpectedly confessed his feelings for me, admitting he had fallen in love. Surprised but elated, I eagerly accepted, and we decided to keep our relationship a secret from the club to avoid disrupting the team dynamics. I was so in love that the secrecy didn't matter. Being with Edward was all I wanted. Our relationship endured beyond college, and we married when I was 23. At Edward's suggestion, I left my job to commit to being by his side. I was completely captivated by him, imagining a bright future together. Now, 25 years later, our life has settled into a more predictable routine. The excitement of our early days has given way to a comfortable, familiar life. My attention to personal style has relaxed, where once I meticulously chose outfits and applied makeup for every date, I now favor comfort and rarely wear makeup. As a homemaker who rarely interacts with anyone outside our home, I've embraced a natural look. Reflecting on these changes, I can't help but notice how much I've changed since my younger years. I've gained weight, and my appearance now mirrors the before photos seen in weight loss ads. This shift in how I look might be contributing to the more routine nature of our relationship, and I sense that Edward now sees me less as a passionate partner and more as a maternal figure. He even makes light-hearted comments, asking for coffee in a way that feels more like a caretaker's role than a wife's. This gradual transformation in our dynamic marks a significant evolution from those early days of love and ambition. Edward's parents live just a 20-minute walk away, and they have always been kind and supportive. In return, I visit them often, eager to help, especially as their health has been failing. My father-in-law is battling a serious illness, and the doctors have given him little hope. He expressed a wish to spend his remaining days at home, and we brought him home for palliative care. The strain has been heavy on my mother-in-law, who seems increasingly worn out by the burden of caring for him. As someone who doesn't work outside the home, I've tried to step in and support, but the toll of it all is beginning to weigh on me as well. I've been helping my mother-in-law nearly every day, yet it's clear that the full responsibility of caring for my father-in-law falls on her shoulders, and it's visibly taking a toll. One evening, she asked if I could stay the night to assist her, her voice filled with hope. I had to decline, though, because Edward, my husband, expects me to be home every night. My refusal left her disheartened, her disappointment clear. Edward has a commanding presence, and he's never been one to help with household chores. He expects dinner to be ready and the house in order when he returns, and leftovers are not an option. Any deviation from his expectations often leads to an intense reaction. One day, I arrived home late after helping my father-in-law, only to be met with Edward's anger. He prioritized his needs over his father's, and I remained silent, knowing that arguing would only make things worse. This dynamic has left me feeling trapped. As a homemaker, I feel guilty for not standing up to Edward or offering my mother-in-law the support she needs during this difficult time. Edward's behavior has been increasingly erratic. He often comes home late without notice, sometimes clearly intoxicated, and his excuse is always the same: he has the right to spend his money however he pleases. This pattern has left me feeling isolated, torn between my duties as a wife and my desire to support my in-laws. Despite my role at home, Edward's expectations have become harder to accept. His frequent nights out were beginning to concern me, not just for our family, but for the families of those he spent time with. Edward, with his authoritative position at work, often used his power to pressure colleagues into socializing after hours. He would boast about always going out with the same coworker, a man who lived alone and was single, claiming that his colleague was always eager for company and drinks. I tried suggesting a compromise to Edward, asking if he could inform me ahead of time about his plans so I could better support his parents, especially with his father's worsening health and his mother's increasing stress. But Edward dismissed my concerns with a laugh, insisting his outings were spontaneous and that his mother could manage on her own. He prioritized his needs over everything, even rushing me through household tasks, without regard for my feelings. Then, unexpectedly, Edward announced he was planning a 3-week trip to Thailand. I was stunned, filled with questions. He had taken the initiative to request time off work and had already thought about what he wanted to do and eat there. When I asked about the sudden trip and mentioned that I didn't have a passport, he casually replied that it didn't matter because I wouldn't be joining him. This was particularly surprising, since we hadn't even gone on a proper honeymoon. Given his usual stance on saving money, curious and concerned, I asked who he would be traveling with. His response was curt: he was going with a coworker, and then he quickly shifted the conversation to ask about dinner. I knew pressing for more details would likely lead to an argument, so I reluctantly accepted the situation, my frustration simmering as I prepared dinner just as Edward wished. On the day of his departure, he left early in the morning, beginning his trip without a word of further discussion. By noon, I found myself reflecting on the dynamics of our relationship, recognizing how difficult it was to express my needs and concerns within the constraints set by Edward's behavior and expectations. In a moment of urgency, I called Edward, only to be met with impatience. "What do you want? I'm about to board a plane," he snapped, irritation clear in his voice. I pleaded with him, explaining the dire state of his parents' health and urging him to reconsider his trip. But Edward dismissed me coldly, claiming he was on vacation and telling me to handle the situation myself. His lack of empathy stung as he hung up, leaving my calls unanswered thereafter. Murmuring a quiet promise of regret, I resigned myself to waiting for his return. 3 weeks later, when Edward finally came back, he seemed unaffected by the events that had unfolded in his absence. I confronted him with the news of his parents' passing, and he reacted with disbelief, questioning me as if I were playing a cruel joke. I explained the heartbreaking details of how his parents had deteriorated and passed away, despite my constant visits and care. Their sudden decline was something I couldn't prevent, and the guilt weighed heavily on me. My anger toward Edward grew, fueled by the memory of his parents' suffering and his complete disregard for their well-being. It was clear he had always placed his own desires above his family's needs, a fact that was impossible to ignore in the face of such tragedy. Confronting him, I accused him of prioritizing a leisure trip over the well-being of his parents. Edward's silence spoke volumes. He seemed unable to face the reality of his choices and the consequences they had brought. In that moment, my disappointment and frustration with him were overwhelming. His carefree demeanor after returning from his vacation stood in sharp contrast to the grim situation at home, underscoring the profound selfishness of his actions. My heart ached, not just for the loss of my in-laws, but also for the realization that the man I had hoped would stand by me in difficult times had chosen himself above all else. With a hint of sarcasm, I probed further, asking about his recent 4-week getaway, suggesting it might have been with a lover. Edward, seemingly defeated, admitted to his affair with Donna, a younger coworker who, in his words, brought him comfort like nothing I could. His confession revealed that his late nights weren't spent working late but with Donna, and he boasted about her qualities in comparison to mine, arrogantly undermining my worth. What came next was even more shocking. With his parents no longer around to object, Edward bluntly suggested a divorce, envisioning a future where he could live with Donna in our home, effectively telling me to leave. The proposal hit me like a blow to the chest. Having dedicated my life to being a homemaker at Edward's request, I had no income of my own and little confidence to start over. But the realization that he had chosen his mistress over attending to his ailing parents was the final straw. With firm resolve, I left him for good. I packed only the essentials and soon found refuge in a budget motel. A week into my new reality, Edward's call broke my peace. His voice was panicked over a missing checkbook. Unfazed, I informed him that the financial documents and accounts under his name were untouched at home, only the checkbook was missing. I had taken only what was mine, the savings I had built up over time and the gifts from my family, all safely tucked away in an account in my name. It wasn't part of our joint property, and I had no obligation to share it with him. Edward, however, was desperate. He had squandered his salary and bonus on his lavish trip and was now hoping to dip into my savings to cover his recklessness. For the first time, it became clear to me just how much Edward had taken my financial stability for granted. He expected me to clean up his mess, but I refused. I suggested he get an advance from his paycheck if he needed money that badly. It was his responsibility to face the consequences of his actions, not mine. As the conversation wore on, I couldn't help but fill him in on the harsh financial reality of his parents' situation. There would be no significant inheritance coming his way. His parents had lived off their pensions, and his father's healthcare costs had eaten through almost everything they had. I also warned him to vacate their rental apartment to avoid further costs. It was a reality check he clearly wasn't ready for, and he struggled to grasp it. With a newfound sense of independence, I told Edward he was on his own. I had no obligation to support him anymore. His reaction, full of disbelief and desperation, did nothing to sway me. His previous actions had already drained any sympathy I might have had for him. I couldn't help but laugh at his situation. After all, this mess was his own doing. His affair with Donna and the way he'd thrown me out of our home without considering the financial implications had brought him to this point. His concerns about his job and the potential fallout from his affair were of no concern to me. I made it clear that he and Donna were the architects of their downfall, and I had no pity for them. Edward continued to plead, acknowledging his mistakes, but I remained unmoved. I ended the call with a final warning of regret, and that was it. Any obligations I had to him were over. The divorce process began soon after. Edward was initially hesitant, mostly due to financial concerns and the fear of his actions becoming public, but eventually, he was convinced by legal counsel to proceed. The divorce marked the end of a chapter defined by his betrayal and financial mismanagement. Thanks to my lawyer's expertise, the division of assets was favorable for me. Edward, who had already wasted most of his savings, found himself in a precarious financial situation after the divorce. He struggled to make ends meet, even dealing with the fallout from having to clear out his parents' apartment and cover the rental costs. Donna, who had originally sought Edward for professional gain, quickly distanced herself when the affair became public. She saw no further use for him and moved on, leaving Edward even more isolated. After everything unraveled, Edward sought to reconnect with me indirectly through our lawyer. His attempts to win me back and request financial assistance were relayed to me with a hint of irony. The desperation in his voice as he begged for help only reinforced my decision to cut ties with him completely. His financial struggles and inability to manage his life after the divorce were a direct consequence of his own decisions. Meanwhile, I had begun to move forward. I decided to re-enter the workforce and landed a part-time job at a local convenience store. It was a brand new experience for me, and I found myself enjoying it far more than I expected. I quickly adapted to the physical demands, whether it was manning the register, managing inventory, or keeping the store tidy. The work was a welcome change, and my manager even mentioned that I might secure a permanent position. It was a small, but hopeful, step toward rebuilding my life. Looking back, I see this chapter not as a decline, but as a midpoint full of potential. The end of my marriage wasn't a setback, but a launchpad for new beginnings. As I navigate this next phase of life, I do so with a renewed sense of purpose and joy, eager to embrace whatever opportunities lie ahead.
The key clicked in the lock with a cruel finality as Marcus stood in the doorway, his smug grin illuminated by the porch light. That's it, little sister. Time to find somewhere else to live. My name is Emma Chin, and at 28 years old, I was being locked out of my childhood home by my own brother just days after our father's funeral. The same house where Dad had raised us after Mom died, where every wall held memories I couldn't bear to leave behind. But Marcus didn't care about memories. He only cared about what he could take. You can't do this, I said, my voice steady despite the anger burning in my chest. Dad wanted this house split between us. You know that. Marcus laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Really? Because that's not what his will says. Everything's in my name now. The house, the business, all of it. Dad knew you weren't cut out for any of this. I clutched my backpack tighter, the few belongings I'd managed to grab before he changed the locks weighing heavily on my shoulder. That will is forged and you know it. Dad would never. Dad would never what? Marcus cut in, his voice dripping with mock concern. Leave everything to his successful son instead of his failure of a daughter. Face it, Emma, you're nothing but a disappointment. Always have been. The words stung, but not as much as they used to. I'd spent years listening to Marcus tear me down, watching him manipulate our father with practiced ease. Dad had been sick for months before he passed, barely lucid in his final weeks. It was the perfect opportunity for Marcus to swoop in and change everything in his favor. What my brother didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment. For years, I'd watched him scheme and plot, always looking for ways to undermine me. I knew he'd try something like this eventually. I just hadn't expected him to move so quickly after Dad's death. You really think you've won, don't you? I asked, meeting his gaze steadily. His smirk widened. I don't think I know. Now get off my property before I call the police. I turned to leave, but paused at the bottom of the steps. One more thing, Marcus. Did you ever wonder why Dad insisted on those weekly dinners with his attorney? The ones you were always too busy to attend. For just a moment, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. What are you talking about? You'll find out, I said simply, then walked away into the night, leaving him standing in the doorway of what he thought was his victory. What Marcus didn't know, what I'd kept carefully hidden for months, was that those dinners weren't just social calls. They were meetings where Dad, in his more lucid moments, had carefully documented everything. Every transaction Marcus had manipulated, every document he'd altered, every lie he told to turn our father against me. Dad might have been sick, but he wasn't stupid. He'd seen through Marcus's act long before the end. I made my way to my car, parked around the corner where Marcus couldn't see it. As I slid behind the wheel, I pulled out my phone and dialed a familiar number. Mr. Harrison? It's Emma Chen. I think it's time we move forward with everything. Are you sure? The attorney's voice was gentle but firm. Once we start this process, there's no going back. I thought about Marcus's smug face, about all the years he'd spent trying to destroy me, about how he thought he'd finally won. I'm sure, I said. Dad trusted us to handle this the right way. Let's make sure his real wishes are carried out. As I hung up, I couldn't help but smile. Marcus thought he'd left me with nothing. But in reality, he'd just walked right into the trap Dad and I had spent months setting up. He was about to learn that sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones you should fear the most. The next morning, I woke up in my apartment, the one Marcus didn't know about, paid for with money I'd been quietly saving for years. I learned early on not to keep all my eggs in one basket, especially with a brother like Marcus around. My phone was already buzzing with messages from him, each one more demanding than the last. What did you mean about Dad's dinners? Stop ignoring me and answer your phone. Whatever you think you know, you're wrong. I deleted them all without responding. Let him stew in his uncertainty for a while. He'd spent years making me feel small and worthless. Now it was his turn to wonder what was coming. I made my way to Mr. Harrison's office, where a small team was already gathered. They'd been working behind the scenes for months, gathering evidence, tracking paper trails, building an ironclad case against everything Marcus had done. Good morning, Emma, Mr. Harrison said, gesturing for me to take a seat. Are you ready for this? I nodded, pulling out a thick folder from my bag. Copies of all the documentation Dad and I had collected. More than ready. What's our first step? Well, he said, spreading several documents across his desk, your father was very thorough in his planning. He knew Marcus would try something like this after he passed, which is why he took such careful precautions. He pointed to a particular document, a true copy of Dad's will, properly notarized and dated just 2 months before his death. This is your father's actual will. The one Marcus filed is a forgery, and we can prove it. I leaned forward, scanning the contents. Everything was there, just as Dad had planned. The house and business were to be split equally between Marcus and me, with specific provisions to prevent either of us from forcing the other out. But that's just the beginning, Mr. Harrison continued, pulling out more papers. We also have evidence of financial fraud. Marcus has been embezzling from the family business for years. Your father suspected it, which is why he started keeping such detailed records. The evidence was damning. Fake invoices, doctored books, money transferred to offshore accounts. Marcus had thought he was being clever, but Dad had seen through it all. He'd just been waiting for the right moment to act. So what happens now? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mr. Harrison smiled grimly. Now we file everything with the court. The forged will, the fraud evidence, all of it. Marcus won't just lose his claim to everything. He'll likely face criminal charges. I sat back in my chair, letting it all sink in. This wasn't just about getting what was rightfully mine anymore. This was about justice, for me, for Dad, for everyone Marcus had ever tried to hurt or control. He's going to fight back, I said quietly. Of course he will, Mr. Harrison agreed. But we have something he doesn't, the truth, and all the evidence to prove it. As if on cue, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Marcus. This one was different though, more desperate. Emma, please. We need to talk. Whatever you think you know, whatever Dad told you, we can work this out. Don't do anything rash. I showed the message to Mr. Harrison, who raised an eyebrow. He's starting to realize he's in trouble. Are you ready for what comes next? This could get ugly. I thought about all the times Marcus had belittled me, all the ways he tried to convince Dad I was worthless, all the years of manipulation and cruelty. I'm ready, I said firmly. Let's show my brother exactly what his worthless little sister is capable of. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal activity. Mr. Harrison's team filed motions contesting the forged will, submitted evidence of Marcus's fraud to the district attorney's office, and began the process of freezing assets to prevent my brother from hiding or moving any more money. Marcus, predictably, didn't take it well. His messages became increasingly frantic, alternating between threats and desperate attempts at reconciliation. You have no idea what you're doing. Please, Emma, let's talk about this. You'll regret this, I promise you that. We're family. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I saved every message but didn't respond. Family had meant something to me once, but Marcus had destroyed that long ago. Now all that mattered was making things right. The first real confrontation came 3 days after I'd left the house. I was leaving Mr. Harrison's office when I saw Marcus waiting by my car, his normally perfectly pressed suit wrinkled, his face twisted with anger. So this is your game, he spat as I approached. You're trying to destroy everything I've built? I almost laughed at that. Everything you've built? You mean everything you've stolen? Everything you've lied about and manipulated to get your way? I did what I had to do, he shouted, taking a step toward me. Dad was weak, sentimental. He would have run the business into the ground trying to be fair to everyone. I made it stronger. By stealing, by forging documents and embezzling money, I kept my voice level, even as I noticed people starting to stare. That's not strength, Marcus. That's cowardice. His face reddened. You have no idea what it takes to succeed in this world. You're just like Dad, too soft, too trusting. I deserve everything I've taken. Well, I said, pulling out my phone, why don't we let the police decide that? His eyes widened as I pressed play on a recording app, capturing every word of his impromptu confession. You, he started, then stopped, realizing what he'd done. You always did talk too much when you were angry, I said quietly. Now get away from my car before I call security. He backed away slowly, his face a mask of hatred. This isn't over, Emma. You're right about that, I agreed. It's just beginning. As I watched him storm off, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. The brother I'd once looked up to, the one I'd trusted and loved, was long gone. This man, this angry, desperate person, was all that was left. But I couldn't dwell on that now. There was still work to be done, and Marcus wasn't going to go down without a fight. I just had to make sure I was ready for whatever came next. The morning of the court hearing arrived crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside the courthouse. I stood in the marble hallway, adjusting my blazer and trying to calm my racing heart. Mr. Harrison was beside me, reviewing last-minute details when I saw Marcus striding toward us, flanked by 2 expensive-looking attorneys. He'd lost weight since our confrontation in the parking lot. His designer suit hung looser on his frame, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. The past month had clearly taken its toll, but his arrogance remained intact. Last chance, Emma, he said, stopping a few feet away. Drop this ridiculous case now, and maybe we can still salvage something. I met his gaze steadily. Salvage what, Marcus? Your reputation? Your freedom? Because both of those are about to disappear. His lawyers exchanged worried glances. They knew what was coming. The evidence was overwhelming, and Marcus' recorded confession had been the final nail in his coffin. You think you've won, he sneered, though I could hear the tremor in his voice. You're nothing but a what? I cut him off. A disappointment, a failure. You've called me every name in the book, Marcus. None of it matters anymore. Before he could respond, the courtroom doors opened. It was time. The next few hours were a blur of testimony and evidence. Mr. Harrison presented everything methodically: the forged will, the financial records, the documentation of years of fraud. With each new piece of evidence, I watched Marcus sink lower in his chair, his face growing paler. When they played the recording from the parking lot, he actually flinched. His own words echoed through the courtroom. I deserve everything I've taken. His lawyers tried to object, to argue that the recording was obtained without consent. But it didn't matter. There was too much other evidence, too many papers with forged signatures, too many doctored financial records. The judge's ruling was decisive. The will submitted by Marcus Chen is hereby declared fraudulent, she announced, her voice firm. The authentic will, as presented by Emma Chen and verified by multiple witnesses, shall be enforced. Furthermore, given the evidence of extensive financial fraud, this court is referring the matter to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. I heard Marcus make a choked sound beside me, but I didn't look at him. I couldn't. This wasn't about watching him suffer. It was about justice. As we left the courtroom, I heard him calling after me. Emma, please. You can't do this to me. I'm your brother. I stopped and turned to face him one last time. You stopped being my brother the moment you decided I was worthless. Everything that's happening now, you did this to yourself. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The business had to be audited, assets had to be divided, and the house, our childhood home, had to be dealt with. Marcus was facing criminal charges for the fraud, and his reputation in the business community was shattered. I received countless calls from old family friends and business associates, all expressing shock at Marcus's actions. Many admitted they'd had suspicions over the years but have been too afraid to speak up. His charm and manipulation have fooled a lot of people. One evening, as I sat in Dad's old office going through papers, I found a letter he'd written to me shortly before his death. The paper was worn, as if he'd handled it many times before sealing it. My dearest Emma, it began, if you're reading this, then everything has played out as we feared it would. I'm sorry I won't be there to help you through it, but I know you're strong enough to handle whatever comes your way. You always have been. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. I wanted to believe the best of your brother, but I couldn't ignore what was happening. The man he's become, that's not the son I raised. But you, Emma, you've grown into exactly the person I hoped you'd be. Strong, principled, and brave enough to stand up for what's right. The evidence we've gathered together will help you fight back, but remember, this isn't about revenge. It's about justice, about making things right. Never let bitterness make you cruel. That's what happened to Marcus, and look where it led him. I set the letter down, wiping my eyes. Dad had known, had always known, that it would come to this. He prepared me not just to fight back, but to do it the right way. 3 months after the court hearing, I stood in front of our childhood home, key in hand. The property division had been finalized and I had decisions to make. I could sell it, start fresh somewhere else. But something held me back. This house held more than just memories of Marcus's betrayal. It held summer afternoons helping Dad in the garden, winter evenings by the fireplace with Mom before she passed, countless small moments that had shaped who I was. As I walked through the empty rooms, I made my decision. I wouldn't sell. Instead, I would rebuild, not just the house, but everything else Marcus had tried to destroy. The family business needed restructuring, needed someone who could lead with integrity instead of greed. I could be that person. Dad had seen that potential in me even when I hadn't seen it in myself. A week later, I received word that Marcus had taken a plea deal. He would serve time for the fraud, though not as much as he probably deserved. Part of me felt relief, not for him, but for myself. I could finally close this chapter and move forward. That evening, sitting in Dad's old office, my office now, I found myself thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Marcus had thought he could break me, had spent years trying to make me believe I was worthless. Instead, he'd only made me stronger. The phone on my desk rang, another business matter needing attention. As I reached for it, I caught my reflection in the window. I didn't see the failure Marcus had tried to create. I saw what Dad had always seen, someone capable, strong, and ready to lead. Chin Industries, Emma speaking, I answered, my voice clear and confident. How can I help you? The rebuilding would take time, but I was ready. Marcus had tried to write my story for me, but in the end, I'd written it myself, and this was just the beginning. 6 months later, I sat in the garden behind the house, enjoying a rare moment of quiet. The business was thriving under new leadership, with transparent practices and ethical standards that would have made Dad proud. The house had been renovated, brightened, turned back into the warm home it was always meant to be. A letter arrived that morning from Marcus, his first communication since starting his sentence. I held it for a long time before opening it, not sure what to expect. Emma, it read, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve to write this letter. But being here, having nothing but time to think, I've realized something. You were never the failure. I was. Everything I did, every lie I told, every scheme I created, it was all because I couldn't stand seeing how capable you really were. Dad saw it. He always saw it. And that drove me crazy. I wanted to be the successful one, the worthy one. So I tried to tear you down. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into its envelope. The words touched something deep inside me, but they didn't change anything. Marcus had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. My phone buzzed, a reminder about tomorrow's board meeting. I had a presentation to finish, proposals to review, a company to run. Standing up, I took one last look at the garden Dad had loved so much. The flowers were blooming again, new life pushing through old soil. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. Sometimes it's about proving them wrong by becoming exactly who you were always meant to be. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into my wrists as Detective Morrison led me through my own office, past shocked employees and toward the elevator. My sister Victoria stood by the reception desk, a look of righteous satisfaction on her face. I told you I'd make you pay, Diana, she called after me. You should have stayed in your lane instead of trying to compete with me. I kept my expression neutral, even as anger burned in my chest. After 15 years of living in Victoria's shadow, I'd finally built something of my own. Now she was trying to tear it all down with false accusations and manufactured evidence. My name is Diana Chen, and at 35, I'd spent the last 3 years building Chen Digital Solutions from the ground up. Meanwhile, my sister Victoria had inherited our father's tech company, Chen Innovations, despite having no real understanding of the industry. But that was nothing new. Victoria had always been his favorite. Ms. Chen, Detective Morrison said as we reached his car, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. I nodded, sliding into the backseat. Through the window, I could see Victoria talking to other officers, gesturing animatedly as she no doubt spun her tale of corporate espionage and stolen trade secrets. If only she knew what was really in that office safe. The ride to the police station was quiet, giving me time to think about how we'd gotten here. Growing up, Victoria had always been the golden child. Pretty, popular, and commanding attention wherever she went. I was the quiet one, more interested in coding and technology than parties and popularity. Our father, James Chen, had built Chen Innovations from nothing, turning it into one of the most successful tech companies in Seattle. Victoria had always assumed she'd inherit everything simply because she was the eldest. She never bothered to learn the business, content to let others do the actual work while she plays CEO. I, on the other hand, had spent every spare moment learning from our father. He taught me coding, system architecture, business strategy, everything he knew. But in public, he maintained the facade that Victoria was his successor. What Victoria didn't know was that in the months before his death, our father had started to see through her act. He'd recognized her lack of knowledge, her disinterest in actually understanding the industry, and he'd made plans accordingly. At the police station, Detective Morrison led me to an interrogation room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he set up a recording device. Ms. Chen, your sister has provided evidence that you stole proprietary information from Chen Innovations to start your own company. She claims you accessed their servers after hours and downloaded confidential client data and project specs. I smiled slightly. Has she shown you proof of these alleged server access logs? He shuffled through some papers. She provided documentation showing unauthorized access from an IP address traced to your home. Interesting, I said. And did anyone verify the authenticity of those logs? Morrison frowned. Our tech team is analyzing them now. You should also analyze the dates, I suggested. You'll find that the alleged unauthorized access occurred during a period when I was still legally an employee of Chen Innovations, with full system access rights. He made a note, his frown deepening. Ms. Chen also claims you stole their client list to poach customers. Detective, I said, leaning forward, have you looked into when these clients started working with my company? you'll find that every single one approached us independently after becoming dissatisfied with Chen Innovations' declining service quality under Victoria's leadership. You seem very calm for someone facing serious charges, he observed. That's because I have nothing to hide, I replied. Everything Victoria has accused me of is false, and I can prove it. But first, I need you to check my office safe. He raised an eyebrow. Your safe? Yes. The combination is 47 to 2391. Inside, you'll find documents that will interest you greatly. Morrison studied me for a moment before nodding to another officer. Johnson, get a team to Ms. Chen's office. Check the safe. As they left, I settled back in my chair. Victoria thought she had won, that she'd finally put me in my place. She had no idea that our father had left me more than just business lessons. The next few hours passed slowly. I answered questions, provided alibis, and waited patiently for the officers to return from my office. Finally, Detective Morrison walked back in, holding a thick manila envelope. Ms. Chen, he said, his tone markedly different, would you like to explain what these documents are? I smiled. Those, detective, are the real reason Victoria is trying to have me arrested. The first set proves that every client who left Chen Innovations did so because of documented service failures under Victoria's management. The second set shows that our father had concerns about Victoria's ability to run the company. And this, he held up a sealed envelope with my father's handwriting on it. That, I said quietly, is a letter our father wrote 3 days before he died. He knew Victoria wasn't ready to run Chen Innovations. He also knew she would never accept that reality. Morrison opened the envelope carefully, reading through the contents. His eyebrows rose progressively higher. According to this, your father left controlling interest in Chen Innovations to you, not Victoria. I nodded. She forged documents after his death to make it appear that she inherited everything. The original will is in there too, along with proof of the forgery. The detective sat down heavily. Why didn't you come forward with this before? Because I wanted to build something of my own first, I explained. I knew that if I challenged Victoria immediately, she would claim I was just jealous. So I started Chen Digital Solutions, proved I could succeed without our father's company. The truth about the inheritance was my insurance policy. And now I said, Victoria has forced my hand. She thought she could destroy me by having me arrested. Instead, she's given me the perfect opportunity to reveal everything. Morrison gathered the documents carefully. We'll need to investigate these claims thoroughly. In the meantime, you're free to go. We'll be in touch. As I walked out of the police station, my phone buzzed with messages from my employees, clients, and lawyers. But the one that caught my eye was from my old assistant at Chen Innovations. Victoria's having a meltdown. Someone told her about the safe. I smiled, climbing into a taxi. The game wasn't over yet, but for the first time since our father died, I held all the cards. Victoria had always underestimated me, dismissed me as the quiet, boring sister who didn't deserve attention. She was about to learn just how wrong she'd been. The morning after my release, I walked into Chen Digital Solutions to find my employees gathered in the lobby, applauding. Their loyalty meant everything. They'd stood by me even when Victoria tried to paint me as a criminal. Back to work, everyone, I said with a smile. We have clients counting on us. My office was exactly as I'd left it, though the safe stood open, its contents now in police possession. My assistant Alex appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. The press is calling nonstop, he said, and Victoria's lawyer tried to serve us with a cease and desist order. I sat down at my desk, powering up my computer. On what grounds? They're still claiming intellectual property theft. But there's something else. Chen Innovations' stock dropped 15% this morning. Rumors about the inheritance dispute are spreading. Perfect. Victoria's attempt to destroy me was backfiring spectacularly, and I was just getting started. My phone buzzed. Detective Morrison. Ms. Chen, we verified the documents from your safe. The will forgery is clear, and we have enough evidence to pursue criminal charges against your sister. Thank you, detective, I replied, but let's hold off on that for now. I have a different approach in mind. After hanging up, I opened my email to find a message from Chen Innovations' board of directors, requesting an urgent meeting. Another from their largest client expressing concerns about the company's stability. And finally, one from Victoria herself. Whatever you think you're doing, stop it now. You have no idea what you're messing with. I was composing my response when my office door burst open. Victoria stormed in, her designer heels clicking against the floor, face flushed with anger. "You vindictive little snake," she hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I leaned back in my chair, studying her. The perfectly polished facade was cracking, her hands shook slightly, and her expensive blazer was buttoned wrong. "I could ask you the same thing," I replied calmly. "Having me arrested? Really, Victoria?" "You stole from me," she shouted. "Everything Dad built was supposed to be mine." "Was it? Or is that just what you convinced yourself?" I stood up, meeting her gaze. "Dad left you the company because you manipulated the will, not because you deserved it." She laughed bitterly. "Deserved it? I was his firstborn. His heir. You were just the weird little tech geek he felt sorry for." "Is that what you think?" I opened my drawer and pulled out a USB drive. "Want to know what Dad really thought?" Victoria's eyes fixed on the drive. "What is that?" "Security footage from Dad's office the day before he died. When you threatened to expose his affair with his secretary if he didn't change the will in your favor." The color drained from her face. "You're lying." "Am I? Should we watch it together? See how you told him you'd destroy his reputation unless he signed everything over to you." She took a step back, her confidence crumbling. "How did you?" "I was there," I said quietly, "in the server room next door, doing maintenance. I heard everything, and I made sure to save the footage." Victoria sank into a chair, her legs seemingly unable to hold her. "What do you want?" "Initially? Nothing. I was content building my own company, letting you play CEO until you inevitably ran things into the ground. But then you tried to have me arrested." "I had to," she burst out. "You were becoming too successful. Clients were leaving us for you. The board was asking questions about my leadership." I walked around the desk, perching on its edge, and now they're going to ask even more questions. About the will, about your qualifications, about everything. "You'll destroy the company," she whispered. "No, Victoria, you've been destroying it for years. I'm going to save it." Just then, Alex appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Chen, the board of directors is here." Victoria's head snapped up. "What? They're not supposed to be here until tomorrow." "They're not here for you," I said, standing. "They're here for me." The next hour was exactly what our father would have called a corporate bloodbath. The board members sat stone-faced as I presented evidence of Victoria's forgery, mismanagement, and declining client satisfaction rates. When I played a small clip from the security footage, Victoria slumped in her chair, defeated. "Ms. Chen," the board chairman said, addressing me, not Victoria, "given these revelations and the original terms of your father's will, we believe immediate leadership changes are necessary." Victoria shot to her feet. "You can't do this. I built." "You built nothing." I cut her off. "You inherited a successful company and drove it into the ground. The only thing you ever built was lies." The chairman cleared his throat. "Ms. Victoria Chen, the board is requesting your immediate resignation. Security will escort you to clear out your office." As Victoria was led away, mascara streaming down her face, I felt no satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge, it was about protecting our father's legacy. "Diana," the chairman said, "we'd like to discuss your return to Chen Innovations as CEO." I shook my head. "Thank you, but no. I've built something of my own at Chen Digital Solutions. I won't abandon that." "Then perhaps we should discuss a merger," he suggested. "Both companies would benefit, and it would honor your father's original vision." Later that evening, as I sat in my office reviewing merger proposals, I found an old photo in my desk. It showed me and Victoria as children, sitting on our father's lap while he worked. We were both smiling then, before ambition and jealousy tore us apart. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "I'm sorry. For everything. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long moment. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her live with the consequences of her actions. But another part remembered that little girl in the photo. "Tomorrow," I replied. "Bring coffee." Victoria arrived at my office early the next morning, carrying 2 cups of coffee, not from an expensive cafe, but from the small diner where we used to eat breakfast with Dad. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. "I brought your favorite," she said quietly, setting the cup on my desk. "Triple shot vanilla latte, extra hot." I gestured to the chair across from me. "You remembered." I remember a lot of things, she said, sitting down. Like how Dad used to let you play with his computer while I was at dance practice. How excited you'd get when you solved a coding problem. The coffee's aroma filled the room, bringing back memories of Sunday mornings and family meetings, before everything went wrong. Why did you do it, Victoria? I asked. Not just the will, all of it. The accusations, the arrest. She stared into her cup for a long moment. I was scared, she finally admitted. Terrified, actually. Everyone expected me to be this brilliant successor to Dad's legacy. But I didn't understand half of what the company did. You were the one who got the technical side, who really knew the business. You could have asked for help and admit I wasn't good enough. She laughed bitterly. Do you know what it's like being the eldest, always having to be perfect? When Dad started mentoring you more, teaching you things he'd never bothered to teach me, I felt replaced. I thought about all the years of competition between us, the rivalry that had poisoned our relationship. So you tried to force him to choose you. The affair was real, she said softly. I found out by accident, but using it against him, that was the worst thing I've ever done. He died thinking I was a monster. Tears slid down her cheeks, and for the first time in years, I saw my sister instead of my rival. He loved you, Victoria, despite everything. Did he? She wiped her eyes. The last thing he said to me was that he was disappointed. Not angry, just disappointed. That was worse. I pulled out the USB drive that had caused her downfall. Want to know something? There's no security footage on this. It's empty. I just needed you to think I had proof. She stared at me, then started laughing through her tears. You played me. The quiet little sister outmaneuvered me completely. I learned from the best, I said, allowing myself a small smile. You were always better at strategy than me. Victoria sobered. What happens now? With the companies? The merger is happening, I said. Chen Innovations and Chen Digital Solutions will become Chen Technologies. But I'm not running it alone. She frowned. What do you mean? The board suggested a co-CEO structure. You handle the business strategy and client relations, the things you're actually good at. I handle the technical side and operations. You trust me, after everything? I took a sip of my coffee, considering. Trust needs to be earned. But family? That's different. Dad built this company believing in the power of family. Maybe it's time we honored that. I don't deserve a second chance, she said quietly. Probably not, I agreed. But you're getting one anyway. Don't waste it. The next few months were challenging. Merging two companies was complex enough without adding family dynamics to the mix. But slowly, we found our rhythm. Victoria's talent for networking and client relationships complemented my technical expertise. Together, we were stronger than either of us had been alone. 1 year after the merger, we stood together at the opening of our new headquarters. The building's lobby featured a wall of photos chronicling our company's history. In the center was a picture of our father, flanked by childhood photos of Victoria and me. He'd be proud, Victoria said, studying the display. Not just of the company, but of us. For finally figuring it out. I squeezed her hand. Better late than never. That evening we had dinner at the old diner, sitting in the same booth where we used to eat with Dad. Victoria pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. What's this? I asked. Open it. Inside was a legal document. She had officially changed her shares in the company to joint ownership between us. Equal partners, just as Dad had originally intended. Victoria. It's time, she said simply. No more games, no more power plays. Just sisters, building something together. As we left the diner, I thought about how far we'd come. The arrest, the safe, the inheritance dispute. It all seemed distant now, like a cautionary tale we'd finally learned from. My phone buzzed with a message from Alex. Emergency at the office. Server crash. Victoria peered over my shoulder and grinned. Race you there. Loser buys coffee tomorrow. I smiled, remembering countless childhood races home from school. You're on. But I warn you. I've been practicing. As we rushed to our cars, laughing like kids again, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't winning. It's finding a way to stop keeping score. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, its official seal glinting in the afternoon sun. My hands trembled as I opened it, the final paperwork confirming my inheritance from Grandma Rose. After 2 years of battling my mother-in-law's attempts to seize control, justice was finally being served. My name is Sarah Chen, and until 3 years ago, I thought I had a decent relationship with my mother-in-law, Patricia Thompson. That all changed when my beloved grandmother passed away, leaving me her estate worth $4.2 million. I just don't understand why she'd leave everything to you, Patricia had said during the reading of the will, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the conference room table. After all, you're not even blood family. I could still hear the disdain in her voice, the way she emphasized not family like it was something dirty. But Grandma Rose hadn't cared about blood relations. She loved me from the moment her grandson Michael brought me home, treating me like the granddaughter she never had. For 8 years, while Patricia spent her time at country clubs and charity galas, I visited Rose every Sunday. We cooked together, gardened together, and shared stories about our lives. When she started showing signs of dementia, I was the one who helped her navigate medical appointments and organized her care. Someone needs to oversee her finances, Patricia had declared during a family dinner, about 6 months before Rose passed. She's clearly not in her right mind anymore, making all these changes to her will. I should have recognized the warning signs then. The way Patricia started showing up at Rose's house unannounced, hovering over her shoulder as she reviewed her financial documents. But I was too focused on caring for Rose to see the manipulation happening right in front of me. It wasn't until after the funeral that I realized just how far Patricia would go to get her hands on Rose's money. I filed a petition to be named executor of the estate, she announced one morning, walking into my kitchen like she owned it. Giving your limited financial experience is really for the best. I set down my coffee cup, trying to keep my voice steady. The will specifically names me as executor, Patricia. Rose wanted me to handle her estate. She smiled, that condescending smile I'd grown to hate. Dear, you're a kindergarten teacher. What do you know about managing millions? Besides, Rose wasn't in her right mind when she made those changes. We both know that. But what Patricia didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment for years. Ever since I noticed her increasing interest in Rose's finances, I'd started documenting everything. Every conversation, every surprise visit, every attempt to isolate Rose from other family members, it was all recorded. I had videos of Rose explicitly stating her wishes, recorded with her full knowledge and consent during her lucid moments. I had documentation from her doctors, confirming her mental competency when she updated her will. And most damaging of all, I had recordings of Patricia herself, plotting with her lawyer to have Rose declared incompetent. We just need to get her evaluated by the right doctor, she'd said in one recording, not realizing my phone was capturing every word. Someone who understands the situation. Once we have her declared incompetent, we can challenge anything she's done in the past year, including that ridiculous will. The first hint Patricia got that things weren't going her way came during the initial court hearing. Her lawyer, a slick man named James Barrett, stood before the judge with his usual confidence. Your Honor, we have serious concerns about Mrs. Thompson's mental state when these changes were made, he began. The deceased was suffering from documented cognitive decline. Objection, Your Honor, my lawyer, Susan Martinez, interrupted. We have extensive medical documentation proving Mrs. Thompson was competent when she updated her will, including evaluations from 3 separate neurologists. Barrett faltered slightly but pressed on. Nevertheless, we believe it's in the best interest of the estate to have someone with more financial experience managing these assets. Mrs. Chen is a schoolteacher with no background in. Your Honor, Susan cut in again. If we may present Exhibit A. She proceeded to play one of my recordings, a conversation between Patricia and Barrett where they explicitly discussed their plan to seize control of the estate. The color drained from Patricia's face as her own voice filled the courtroom. I don't care what it takes. That money belongs in this family, not with some outsider who married in. Find a way to get it done. The judge's expression darkened as he listened. When the recording ended, he turned to Patricia's lawyer. Mr. Barrett, are you aware that conspiring to fraudulently seize control of an estate is a serious offense? Barrett tugged at his collar, suddenly looking less confident. Your Honor, I can explain. But there was no explaining away the evidence. Over the next 2 hours, Susan methodically presented our case. The medical records, the videos of Rose, the multiple recordings of Patricia's attempts to manipulate the situation. By the time we finished, Patricia's petition wasn't just denied. She was facing potential legal consequences for her actions. This court finds clear evidence of attempted fraud, the judge declared. Mrs. Chen will retain her position as executor, as per the deceased's wishes. Furthermore, Mrs. Patricia Thompson is hereby barred from any involvement with the estate. Mr. Barrett, I suggest you speak with the ethics board about your role in this matter. As we left the courthouse that day, Patricia grabbed my arm. Her perfectly composed facade had cracked, revealing the fury beneath. You think you've won, she hissed. This isn't over. That money belongs in this family. I calmly removed her hand from my arm. You're right, Patricia. The money does belong in the family. That's exactly where Rose placed it, with me. You're not family, she spat. You're just some gold digger who wormed her way in. Mom, stop. Michael's voice cut through her tirade. My husband had been quietly supportive throughout this ordeal, torn between loyalty to his mother and his knowledge of what was right. Sarah is my wife, he continued, taking my hand. She was more family to Grandma Rose than you ever were. All those years you were too busy for Sunday visits, Sarah was there. When Rose needed help, Sarah was there. The only person trying to take advantage of this situation is you. Patricia recoiled as if she'd been slapped. For a moment, she just stared at us, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Then she turned on her heel and stormed off, her expensive heels clicking against the courthouse floor. That evening, as Michael and I sat in our kitchen discussing the day's events, my phone buzzed with text messages from Patricia's friends. Prominent society women she'd enlisted in her campaign against me. You've made a powerful enemy, one message read. The Thompson family has a long memory. I showed the messages to Michael, who just shook his head. They can't hurt you anymore, he said. We have the truth on our side. But we both knew this wasn't really about truth or justice. For Patricia, it was about control, about maintaining her image as the matriarch of a wealthy family. Losing control of Rose's estate wasn't just a financial blow. It was a social embarrassment she wouldn't easily forget. As I sat there reading through the increasingly hostile messages, I realized something important. This wasn't just about protecting my inheritance anymore. It was about standing up to a woman who had spent years manipulating and bullying others to get her way. I picked up my phone and began forwarding the threatening messages to Susan. If Patricia wanted to continue this fight, I would be ready. I had learned from our first battle, documentation was everything. The next morning, I went to work as usual, teaching my kindergarten class and trying to maintain some normalcy. But during my lunch break, I received an urgent call from Susan. Patricia's filed an appeal, she said without preamble. She's claiming she has new evidence about Rose's mental state, but that's not the worst part. I braced myself. What else? She's also filed a complaint with your school board, alleging professional misconduct. She's trying to get you fired, Sarah. I gripped the phone tighter, anger rising in my chest. On what grounds? She's claiming you used your position as a teacher to manipulate Rose, that you brought her to school events and used the children to emotional manipulate her into changing her will. The accusation was so absurd, it would have been funny if it weren't so potentially damaging to my career. Yes, I had brought Rose to some school events. She loved seeing the children perform in holiday shows. But the idea that I had somehow used this to manipulate her was ridiculous. We need to meet, Susan said. Tonight if possible. This is getting ugly, and we need to be prepared. As I hung up the phone, I caught my reflection in the classroom window. The woman staring back at me wasn't the same person who had once tried so hard to win Patricia's approval. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who wouldn't back down from a fight. Patricia wanted to play hardball. Fine. But she was about to learn that I had a few more cards left to play, cards that would make her previous humiliation in court look like a minor embarrassment. Patricia's attempt to have me fired backfired spectacularly. The school board called an emergency meeting to review her allegations, but I came prepared. Mrs. Thompson's claims are not only false, they're malicious, Susan stated, presenting the board with a thick folder of evidence. We have signed statements from multiple witnesses, including school staff and parents, confirming that Mrs. Rose Thompson's visits to the school were always appropriate and supervised. But our ace in the hole was a video recording from the previous year's Christmas pageant. There was Rose, sitting in the audience with other grandparents, her face beaming as she watched the children perform. More importantly, the video showed Patricia herself standing at the back of the auditorium, clearly aware of and unbothered by her mother-in-law's presence at school events. If Mrs. Chen was using these events to manipulate Mrs. Rose Thompson, why did he raise concerns at the time? The board chairman asked Patricia directly. She fumbled for an answer, her usual poise cracking. I didn't realize at the time. Didn't realize what? Susan pressed. That your mother-in-law enjoyed spending time with her grandson's wife and her students, or that you could use these innocent visits as ammunition in your vendetta. The board dismissed Patricia's complaint unanimously, but the damage to her reputation was just beginning. The local paper caught wind of the story, and suddenly the Thompson family's dirty laundry was being aired in public. Prominent socialite attempts to frame teacher in inheritance dispute read the headline. The article detailed Patricia's attempts to seize control of the estate, her false accusations against me, and her history of manipulative behavior. The social fallout was immediate. Patricia's country club friends, the same ones who had been sending me threatening messages, suddenly went silent. Her position on various charity boards became awkward as other members distanced themselves. But Patricia wasn't done fighting. Her appeal of the original court decision moved forward, with her lawyer claiming to have new evidence about Rose's mental state. The new evidence turned out to be testimony from Rose's former housekeeper, Maria, who claimed she had witnessed Rose in states of confusion, unable to recognize family members or remember basic facts. What Patricia didn't know was that I had maintained contact with Maria after Rose's death. The morning of the appeal hearing, Maria walked into court with us, not with Patricia. Mrs. Ramirez, Susan began her questioning. Can you tell us about your recent conversation with Mrs. Patricia Thompson? Maria straightened in her seat. She offered me money to lie, she stated firmly. She wanted me to say Mrs. Rose was confused all the time, but it wasn't true. Yes, sometimes she had bad days, but she always knew who she loved and who truly cared for her. The judge's face darkened as Maria detailed Patricia's attempts to bribe her. When she finished testifying, he turned to Patricia's lawyer. Mr. Barrett, are you aware that suborning perjury is a criminal offense? Barrett, looking increasingly uncomfortable, requested a brief recess. When court resumed 20 minutes later, he announced that his client was withdrawing her appeal. But the judge wasn't finished. Mrs. Thompson, he said, his voice stern, this court takes a very dim view of attempting to corrupt the judicial process. You are hereby fined $50,000 for contempt of court, and I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for possible criminal charges. Patricia sat there, rigid with shock, as the judge continued. Furthermore, you are ordered to pay all legal fees incurred by Mrs. Chen in defending against this frivolous appeal. Should you attempt any further legal action regarding this estate, you will face additional sanctions. As we left the courthouse for the second time, Patricia was surrounded by reporters. The society pages that had once featured her charity work now carried photos of her trying to shield her face from cameras. That evening, as Michael and I sat in our backyard discussing the day's events, his phone rang. It was his sister Catherine, Patricia's daughter, who had remained neutral throughout the conflict. Mom's had a complete meltdown, she reported. She's locked herself in her room and won't talk to anyone. Dad's talking about taking her to a therapist. Michael sighed heavily. Maybe that's not a bad idea. This obsession with controlling Grandma's money. It's destroyed her reputation, her relationships. And for what? Catherine added. The money was never hers to begin with. Grandma Rose knew exactly what she was doing when she left everything to Sarah. After hanging up, Michael turned to me. I'm sorry, he said softly. Sorry for all of this, for not standing up to her sooner. I took his hand. You did stand up to her when it mattered most. And now maybe she'll finally get the help she needs. Over the next few months, we heard through family members that Patricia had indeed started seeing a therapist. The potential criminal charges were dropped after she agreed to make a substantial donation to a local elder care facility. As for the inheritance, I honored Rose's wishes exactly as she had intended. Half of the money went into a trust for education, both for our future children and for scholarships for underprivileged students. The other half was invested in expanding the small community garden Rose had loved, turning it into a thriving urban farm that provided fresh produce to local food banks. 1 year after our final court battle, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Patricia, written on her therapist's advice as part of her recovery process. Dear Sarah, it began. I owe you an apology. My actions were driven by pride, greed, and a misguided sense of entitlement. I convinced myself that you were the outsider, the threat to our family's legacy. In reality, you were the one truly carrying on Rose's legacy of kindness and generosity. The letter went on for several pages, expressing remorse for her actions and asking for a chance to make amends. It was signed simply, with regret, Patricia. I showed the letter to Michael, who read it carefully. Do you think she means it? He asked. I don't know, I replied honestly, but I'm willing to find out. The following Sunday, exactly 3 years after Rose's passing, we invited Patricia to join us at the community garden. As she walked through the thriving beds of vegetables and flowers, I could see something in her expression shift. Rose would have loved this, she said quietly, touching a blooming rose bush, one of many I had transplanted from her original garden. She always said gardens were for growing people, not just plants. That's why she left everything to me, I said gently, not because she loved me more, but because she trusted me to grow something meaningful from what she left behind. Patricia nodded, tears in her eyes. I understand that now. I just wish I hadn't had to lose so much to learn that lesson. As we walked through the garden together, I thought about Rose and what she would make of all this. She had always said that money was like water. It could either nourish growth or erode foundations, depending on how you used it. Patricia's attempts to seize control of the inheritance had nearly destroyed our family. But in the end, Rose's wisdom had prevailed. The money had done exactly what she intended. It had revealed true characters, tested relationships, and ultimately helped heal old wounds. Today, the community garden stands as a testament to Rose's legacy. Local schoolchildren come for lessons about growing food and caring for the environment. Families gather for community events in the pavilion built in Rose's memory. And yes, Patricia occasionally volunteers, working alongside others to tend the gardens her mother-in-law loved so much. She's different now, humbled by her fall from grace, but perhaps better for it. The perfectly coiffed society matriarch has been replaced by someone more genuine, more willing to get her hands dirty in actual soil rather than family politics. As for me, I continue teaching kindergarten, sharing Rose's love of learning with new generations. The inheritance changed many things in our lives, but it didn't change who I am or what I believe in. Sometimes, when I'm working in the garden, I think I can feel Rose's presence among the flowers she loved so much. I imagine her smiling, satisfied that her legacy grew into something even more beautiful than she planned. And I smile too, knowing that the real inheritance wasn't the money at all. It was the strength to stand up for what's right, the wisdom to use resources for good, and the understanding that true family isn't about blood or money, but about love and trust freely given. Patricia learned that lesson the hard way. But in the end, maybe that's exactly what Rose intended all along. The mahogany conference table seemed to stretch endlessly before me as I sat listening to the will reading. Michael, my older brother, lounged in our father's old chair at the head of the table, already playing the role of CEO before the papers were even signed. And to my daughter, Catherine, the lawyer Reed, adjusting his glasses, I leave the marketing division of Chen Industries, along with my sincere hopes that she will continue to grow it as she has these past 5 years. I kept my face carefully neutral, though my hands clenched in my lap. 5 years of expanding the marketing division into a powerhouse that generated 40% of the company's revenue, and this was my inheritance. And to my son, Michael, the lawyer continued, I leave controlling interest in Chen Industries, including all assets, properties, and patents, with full executive authority effective immediately. Michael's smile widened. He'd been practicing that smile since we were kids, the one that said, I win, without saying a word. My name is Catherine Chen, and at 34, I thought I understood family dynamics. But watching my brother take control of everything our father had built, everything I'd helped grow, I realized I'd underestimated just how far sibling rivalry could go. If there are no questions, the lawyer said, gathering his papers, I'll file these with the court today. Actually, I said, speaking for the first time since the reading began, I'd like to see the original will, the one from before Dad's revision. Michael's smile flickered slightly. That's irrelevant, Kat. This is the current will. But the lawyer was already pulling out another document. It's within Ms. Chen's rights to review the previous version. I took the old will, dated just 2 weeks before our father's death, before Michael had somehow convinced him to change everything during those final morphine haze to gaze. Thank you, I said, scanning the pages I'd already memorized. I'd like copies of both versions, please. Planning to contest? Michael asked, his tone sharp despite his maintained smile. I met his gaze steadily. Just being thorough. Dad taught us that, remember? What Michael didn't know was that our father had taught me more than just business thoroughness. He taught me to plan ahead, to see the bigger picture, and to always keep an ace up my sleeve. The drive back to my office in the marketing division was tense with memories. Every corner of Chen Industries held echoes of my father, his vision, his integrity, his belief in building something that would last. Sarah, my assistant and closest friend, was waiting in my office. How bad was it? Exactly as we expected, I said, setting down my briefcase. Michael gets everything except marketing. She frowned. But your father promised. He always said you chair leadership. He did. Until Michael got to him at the end. I pulled out my laptop, typing in a complex password. But Dad wasn't as out of it as Michael thought. Remember that project he had me working on last year? The one Michael knew nothing about. Sarah's eyes widened. Project Phoenix? I nodded, opening an encrypted folder. Look at this. The screen showed a series of patents, groundbreaking technology that would revolutionize our industry. Patents that weren't listed in either version of the will because they weren't technically part of Chen Industries. Your father transferred these to you personally, Sarah breathed, scrolling through the documents. Before he got sick. And here's the best part, I said, pulling up another file. The marketing division he left me? It's not just marketing anymore. 3 months ago, Dad restructured it as an independent subsidiary, with its own board, its own assets, and full rights to develop these patents. Does Michael know? I thought about my brother's smug smile during the will reading. No, he never paid attention to the boring administrative details. He just saw the marketing division as my little pet project. Sarah sat back, a slow smile spreading across her face. So while he thinks he's won everything, he's actually given me exactly what I need to build something bigger. I closed the laptop carefully. But first, we need to understand exactly what he did to make Dad change that will. The next few weeks were a careful dance of investigation and pretense. I played the part of the dutiful sister, attending board meetings where Michael made sweeping changes to our father's carefully built company. I watched as he installed his own people in key positions, pushed out longtime employees, and started dismantling the ethical guidelines our father had established. But all the while, I was gathering evidence. Security footage from the hospital during Dad's final days. Witness statements from nurses who'd seen Michael pressuring our father when he was heavily medicated. And most importantly, documentation of the systematic way Michael had been undermining the company for years, setting himself up to take control. Look at this, Sarah said one evening, pointing to a series of financial transactions. He's been funneling company resources into his own projects for years. Shell companies, hidden accounts. I studied the numbers, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. Dad knew. That's why he set all this up. He knew Michael would try to take everything. But why not just stop him? Cut him out completely. I thought about my father's face the last time we really talked, 3 days before Michael showed up with a new will. Because he was trying to protect both his children, in his own way. He gave Michael the company he thought he wanted, and gave me the tools to build something better. A knock at my office door made us both jump. Lisa from accounting stood there, looking nervous. Ms. Chen, there's something you need to see. She handed me a flash drive with trembling hands. I found these records. Mr. Michael asked me to clean up some old accounts, but this isn't right. The drive contained proof of something even worse than we'd suspected. Michael hadn't just been stealing from the company. He'd been actively sabotaging projects, ensuring that only his initiatives succeeded while others mysteriously failed. How long has this been going on? I asked quietly. Years, Lisa whispered. Since before your father got sick. I think that's why he got sick. The stress of discovering what Michael was doing. The pieces clicked into place. Dad's sudden decline, his mysterious symptoms that had baffled the doctors. The way Michael had insisted on controlling his medical care at the end. Thank you, Lisa, I said, securing the flash drive in my safe. I know how risky it was to bring this to me. She straightened her shoulders. Your father was good to all of us. He deserved better than this. That night, as I sat in my father's old study, The one room Michael hadn't dared change yet. I found one final message. It was hidden in an old photo album, tucked behind a picture of our whole family from happier days. Catherine, the note read in my father's shaky handwriting, if you're reading this, then everything has happened as I feared it would. Michael has chosen his path. But you have always seen the bigger picture. The patents are your foundation. Build something worthy of them. And remember, sometimes the greatest victory comes from letting others think they've won. Love, Dad. I touched the words gently, feeling the imprint of his pen strokes. I understand now, Dad, I whispered. And I won't let you down. 3 months after the will reading, I sat in my office reviewing financial reports. Michael had been busy, systematically stripping Chin Industries of everything that had made it special. But he'd left me alone in my little marketing division, exactly as Dad had predicted. You need to see this, Sarah said, bursting into my office. She laid a tablet in front of me, showing a news article from our main competitor, Apex Technologies. Chin Industries announces major restructuring, the headline read. Below was a photo of Michael shaking hands with James Preston, Apex's notorious CEO. He's selling off our core divisions, Sarah said, scrolling through the article. Everything except marketing, which he probably thinks is worthless. I smiled slightly. Did you notice the date of the announcement? Next Thursday. Why? Because that's exactly when we'll be ready to launch. I turned my laptop around, showing her the project I'd been working on for months. Dad's patents aren't just revolutionary, they're game changers. And thanks to Michael's negligence, we've been developing them right under his nose. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. While Michael was busy dismantling our father's legacy, I was building something new. The marketing division, now secretly restructured as Phoenix Technologies, was ready to emerge from the ashes of what Michael thought he'd destroyed. The morning of Michael's big announcement, I arrived early at Chin Industries headquarters. The lobby was buzzing with nervous employees. Everyone had heard rumors about the Apex deal. Kat, Michael called, spotting me by the elevators. Here to watch the fireworks? I adjusted my blazer carefully, wouldn't miss it. The conference room was packed with board members, executives, and press. Michael stood at the podium, practically glowing with self-importance. Today marks a new chapter for Chin Industries, he began. Our partnership with Apex Technologies will streamline operations and maximize shareholder value. I tuned out his corporate doublespeak, watching the faces in the room. Some looked resigned, others worried. A few, the ones Michael had brought in, looked smugly satisfied. And now, Michael continued, I'd like to introduce James Preston, CEO of Apex Technologies. Preston approached the podium, his expensive suit failing to hide his predatory nature. Thank you, Michael. This merger represents... Excuse me, I interrupted, standing. Before we continue, I have an announcement of my own. Michael's smile tightened. Kat, this isn't the time. Actually, it's exactly the time. I nodded to Sarah, who started distributing folders to everyone in the room. As CEO of Phoenix Technologies, formerly known as Chin Industries Marketing Division, I'm pleased to announce our own major development. The room erupted in murmurs as people opened the folders, revealing details of our new technology and its potential impact on the industry. These patents, Preston said, flipping through the pages with growing alarm. They're revolutionary, but they belong to Chin Industries. No, I cut in. They belong to Phoenix Technologies. My father transferred them to me personally before his death, along with full development rights. Michael's face had gone from red to white. That's impossible. I have controlling interest in all Chin Industries' intellectual property. In all intellectual property listed in Dad's will, I corrected him. These patents were transferred months before to what everyone thought was just the marketing division, a division you never bothered to properly investigate before making deals with Apex. I turned to address the room directly. While my brother was busy dismantling everything our father built, we were building something new. Something that will make the technology Apex wants to buy obsolete before the ink dries on their contract. The press was frantically taking notes. Board members were whispering among themselves. Preston was already on his phone, likely calling his lawyers. You can't do this, Michael hissed, grabbing my arm. I'm in charge here. Actually, I said, removing his hand. You're in charge of whatever's left of Chin Industries after your mismanagement comes to light. I gestured to Sarah, who started distributing a second set of folders. These documents show years of financial manipulation, project sabotage, and corporate theft, all under your leadership. The room fell silent as people began reading the evidence. Years of Michael's schemes, carefully documented and verified. And that's not all, I continued, my voice carrying in the silence. We also have evidence suggesting your involvement in Dad's sudden decline. The doctors are very interested in reviewing his medical records, especially the changes you made to his medication in those final days. Michael lunged for me, but my security, was faster. As they escorted him from the room, I could hear him shouting about betrayal and family loyalty. Preston tried to slip out quietly, but I called after him. Mr. Preston, you might want to hold off on any stock purchases. Things are about to get interesting. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of investigations, revelations, and restructuring. Michael was placed on administrative leave pending a criminal investigation. Apex Technologies withdrew their takeover bid, and Chen Industries' board of directors was in chaos. I watched it all unfold from my office at Phoenix Technologies, where we were preparing for our own public launch. The FBI wants to interview you again, Sarah said, bringing in my morning coffee. They have more questions about Michael's financial records. I nodded, reviewing the latest prototype reports. Our first product using Dad's patents was exceeding all expectations. Schedule it for tomorrow. And get Lisa from accounting in here. She deserves recognition for coming forward with evidence. A knock at my door interrupted us. It was Janet Chen, my father's sister and longtime board member at Chen Industries. Catherine, she said, closing the door behind her. We need to talk about the company. I gestured for her to sit. Aunt Janet had always been the family peacekeeper, trying to mediate between Michael and me even when we were kids. The board met this morning, she continued. With Michael's situation and the evidence of his mismanagement, they voted to remove him as CEO. They want you to take over Chen Industries. I sat back, thinking about my father's note. Sometimes the greatest victory comes from letting others think they've won. No, I said quietly. Janet blinked. No. But Catherine, this is what you've wanted, what you deserved. The company should have been yours from the start. Chen Industries was Dad's dream, I explained. And Michael corrupted it. But Phoenix, I gestured to the prototype designs on my desk. This is something new. Something built on Dad's principles but free from the past's shadows. The board won't accept this. The shareholders will be very interested in the partnership I'm about to propose. I pulled out a document I'd been preparing. Phoenix Technologies wants to work with Chen Industries as equals. We'll license our patents, collaborate on development, but remain independent entities. Janet studied the proposal, her expression thoughtful. You're not just protecting your father's legacy, she said finally. You're building your own. Exactly. And in doing so, I'm honoring what Dad really wanted, for both his children to find their own path. The news of Michael's arrest broke the next morning. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of financial fraud, corporate espionage, and most damning of all, medical records showing he deliberately manipulated our father's medication to keep him confused and compliant during those final days. I visited him once in jail before his trial. He sat across from me in an orange jumpsuit, his arrogance finally stripped away. Why? I asked simply. He stared at his hands. I had to prove I could run the company better than you. Dad always favored you, his brilliant daughter who understood the business like he did. I was just there. Dad loved us both, I said. He tried to protect us both in his way. You just couldn't see it. And now you've won, he said bitterly. Got everything you wanted. I stood to leave. No, Michael. I built something of my own. That's what Dad was trying to teach us all along. 6 months later, I stood on a stage at the Phoenix Technologies launch event. Our first product, a revolutionary clean energy system based on Dad's patents, was being unveiled to overwhelming acclaim. In the front row sat Aunt Janet, along with key members of both Phoenix and Chen Industries boards. The partnership between the companies had already led to groundbreaking developments. My father, I told the audience, believed that true success wasn't about winning at all costs. It was about building something meaningful, something that makes the world better. Today, we honor that belief. Later that evening, I visited Dad's grave, placing fresh flowers beside his headstone. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of changing seasons. You were right, I said softly. About everything. Michael choosing his path, about me needing to find my own way. I understand now why you set things up the way you did. I placed a small model of our first Phoenix product beside the flowers. It incorporated all of his best ideas while adding something new, exactly as he taught me to do. Sarah found me there as the sun was setting. The board's waiting for our final approval on the expansion plans. I touched Dad's headstone one last time. What do you think he'd say about all this? She smiled. I think he'd say his daughter built something worthy of his legacy and then surpassed it. Walking back to my car, I thought about everything that had happened. Michael's betrayal had been painful, but it had freed me to create something new. Something that honored our father's principles while charting its own course. Phoenix Technologies wasn't just a company, it was proof that sometimes losing what you thought you wanted leads you to build something better than you imagined. Dad had known that all along. He'd given Michael the company he thought he wanted, and given me the tools to build something more. In the end, we'd both gotten exactly what we needed. As I drove home in the gathering dusk, I thought about that old photo album in Dad's study, the one with his final message. I'd moved it to my office at Phoenix, a reminder that some legacies aren't about what you inherit, but what you choose to build. And I was just getting started.